Você me avisa quando puder. Não, me avisa que daí eu aviso pra ele. Tá bom. Já estão todos aí do painel também? É. Olá, bom dia. Agradecemos a presença de vocês e aos que nos acompanham.
Good morning, everyone. You are mostly welcome, those who are here on site and those who are following us remotely. Welcome to our international seminar, Cetic.br, 20 years of celebration. Please check if your smartphones are set into the mute mode, and I feel happy for your help. Today we are going to have presentations in English, Portuguese, and some panels in Spanish. That's why the simultaneous interpretation devices are available at the entrance of the theater, and please choose the language of your preference.
Meu nome é Anne, eu nasci em Rio Pardo de Minas Gerais, mas atualmente eu moro em São Paulo, já faz 18 anos, e eu tenho 20 anos de idade. Eu sou jovem aprendiz administrativo e eu estudo Direito. Eu gosto muito de ler antes da tecnologia. Eu tenho uma biblioteca perto da minha casa e eu ia muito para ela, quase todo dia, toda tarde, e eu pegava muitos livros. E depois que eu ganhei meu primeiro celular, eu comecei a ler pelo celular. Hoje em dia tenho Kindle. Eu acredito que o uso do Kindle e do livro virtualmente é bem mais prático e também a gente usa de uma forma bem mais fluida. Quando eu volto para Minas Gerais, para casa dos meus avós, é bem diferente, porque na casa dos meus avós é bem roça mesmo, é bem interior, então lá não pega internet e é um choque cultural enorme. Então, geralmente eu baixo os livros, deixo algumas séries baixadas, e aí geralmente a gente conversa mais com a família, eu saio mais.
Daremos início ao dia de hoje com a sessão principal.
Today's presentation will start with session 4, Digital Economy and AI, and the topic is how digital transformation and the early adoption of AI is promoting meaningful changes in all economies at a global level, driving new business models based on intensive data use. This session will reflect upon the challenges to build up inclusive digital economies, especially in the global South countries countries. And to moderate this debate, it's a great honor to invite Mr. Bertrand de la Chapelle, and with his experience as a French diplomat and as entrepreneur in technology, and with emphasis in organization of the civil society, he is implementing and being a pioneer in multi-sectorial and multidisciplinary initiatives. As a chief vision officer of Data Sphere Initiative, he promotes a structure of data governance where everyone may enjoy that responsibly. He is also executive director of Internet and Jurisdiction Policy Network since 2022. Welcome, Mr. Bertrand.
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. You know that when the Pope chooses his name because of the importance of dealing with the artificial intelligence challenges, it means that we have something that is close to a civilizational challenge and a question. So I'm very happy to, before this panel, have a bit of a sharing of thoughts about what that means. And I want to do it around 4 words. One is cooperation, the other one is nuance, the third one is value, and the fourth one is power. And in order to start this discussion, I invite you to a voyage first in time, and then in space. In time, because if you look at history, a lot of people will tell you that history is just a series of battles, the stories of kings, queens, fighters. And actually, this is partially true. But it is also the constant effort of humanity to organize itself in structures that are larger and larger and larger. And we have reached a point where, after the fourth major revolution in communication, after language, writing, and printing, we got the internet, and we now have billions of people connected in real time all around the world. Doesn't mean that they're united, though, but they are connected. And a lot of people will tell you, at the moment especially, that the only thing that characterizes humans is competition. I beg to differ. Humanity and the human species is precisely specific in the whole realm of nature by its capacity to cooperate. Because it has invented those tools of communication. It has invented tools for economic growth. It has invented institutions. And so don't let people make you believe that there is only one engine for humanity, which is competition. There are two. Just like our bodies are organized and regulated, and most biology is done around the activation and repression of genes in the DNA. And so we are now, because of this focus on competition, in a fundamental arms race, or just a race actually, around artificial intelligence that is driven by, let's be honest, supersized egos and people who have basically an admiration and a legitimate and understandable excitement about the Promethean power that they're discovering. But there's a dangerous race here. And when you talk to these people in those organizations that develop the most advanced models, deep down in there, they are also extremely scared. They're scared about the powers and the forces that they're unleashing, and they're also scared of each other, enormously scared. And this is not sound. This is not a situation that we want. And the problem is that a lot of governments, after having tried to think that maybe we could look at how to manage it in a slightly different way, they seem to embark on the race as well, as if nobody could stop it. Not that it needs to stop, but at least can we still have the goal of controlling the trajectory of our own societies? I think we should. And I think everybody knows we should. The problem is we don't necessarily know how. So the first point I wanted to highlight, as I said, is the word cooperation. And without belaboring, as a lot of us are spending a lot of compute energy for creating starter kits and beautiful and funny deep fakes, as we saw yesterday in one of the panels, there are also a lot of people who are devoted their times to inventing new tools for medical diagnosis, inventing new scientific instruments, things that will open up the realm of knowledge in the same way that the telescope opened up the realm of knowledge in many regards. On that note, by the way, I didn't plan to say it, but as I said, we need to remember that the telescope was not just a scientific thing. It triggered a wave of consequences that is absolutely fascinating, because it triggered a reconfiguration of the way we perceive the universe, the astronomic model from Ptolemy to Copernicus. And it triggered, as a matter of fact, a fundamental religious revolution with the Reformation. And one of the consequences of the Reformation was 30 years of war, devastating wars in Europe, that led to the foundations of what our international system is today, the Westphalian system. So technology is always closely interlinked with all the different other activities of humanity. But keep in mind, as a first message of positive hope, is that we have the capacity also to focus on what this technology of artificial intelligence can bring us in the field of cooperation, and not only in the field of competition. The second thing, I said, this is about time. Let's talk about space. You're probably familiar with the idea that our little planet, this blue planet, sorry, is floating in space at exactly the right distance from the sun, neither too close nor too far. And the consequence is that water is in liquid form. Why does it matter? It's because the liquid form of water allows the molecules to recombine, and this is the condition for life to emerge. This particular habitable zone in astronomy has a nickname. It's called the Goldilocks zone. I don't know if you're familiar by raising hands with the Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Okay. You know that in the house of the Three Bears, Goldilocks comes in, and at one point, there are three bowls. It can be soup, it can be porridge, doesn't matter. One is too hot, the other one is too cold, and the other one is just right. And when you think about this notion of Goldilocks zone, beyond astronomy, you begin to see it everywhere. It's in medical treatment for certain diseases, like the right dose for the right person. It is in marketing pitch for the pricing. And I won't belabor, but you can see online there are many fields where this Goldilocks zone, as the middle ground between two extremes and two excesses, is an expression. Why am I talking about this? Because we talk about the digitalization of society. And I'm thinking increasingly that we're getting into a binarization of society, that we are thinking in terms of zeros and ones. It's always the polarization. It's always either you're with me or against me. We know the story. Or you're red or you're blue, or you're from one community or another. It's always a call to choose which side you're on, eliminating completely this notion of nuance that I was talking about. When I was on the board of ICANN, the former chairman of the board once told me, but Bertrand, we don't have time for nuance. This was the worst comment that I've ever heard. And I absolutely believe that we should always take the time for nuance, especially in the fields that we're talking about. And so here, the problem is that the social media have largely contributed to this fragmentation, this polarization, this choice. And of course, it has consequences on the political environment. And we are now constantly asked to join one group or another. And initially, let's be honest, it was not intentional, this polarization. But unfortunately, it has proven that it became more and more intentional, and including by people who were instrumentalizing these trends for electoral benefit. So in a world that is constantly asking us to choose between 1 and 0, we need to keep the desire to look for the nuance and the Goldilocks zone. That is the only way to keep sanity in the face of those pressures. And as a matter of fact, because the challenge, the civilizational challenge is how to organize the coexistence of billions of people with very different social, political, religious, and legal environments into shared online spaces, what better than this notion of equilibrium, of respect, not too much, not too little, to find the modalities for coexistence. And it's interesting to see that because our society and humanity is a very complex system that is increasingly connected and that is moving at very rapid pace, connecting and reconnecting constantly. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Thomas Schelling, who is a Nobel Prize in economics, who has written an amazing book about micro behaviors. Thank you. Micro decisions. Perfect timing. Micro decisions and macro behavior. Just like a flock of birds or swarms of fish, the individual decisions of each of us has actually a potential impact on the larger group, because these are complex dynamic systems. And here, if we keep in our own personal lives, professional activities, or political engagement, this desire to keep this balancing factor, this medium state, there's a great likelihood that the overall emergent behavior is going to be much more palatable than the fights that we're preparing for at the moment. And in particular, I want to highlight one thing. When I mentioned this desire of being in the Goldilocks zone, first of all, people begin to feel that I'm a little bit obsessed about it, because once you begin to see it, you see it everywhere. You'll see. But there's always this criticism, yes, but this is just so tepid. This is just, it's middle of the road. I disagree. First of all, because in the current environment, it takes a lot of moral strength to resist the pressure to join one camp to the other and say, well, wait a minute, things are a little bit more complex than you make it look like. And the second thing is that there's nothing not passionate about bringing people together. I've done that for more than 20 years now, and I will never stop. So don't let people tell you either that this is not an ambitious objective. So I brought you in time and in space, but you may be wondering a little bit where I'm going with this, and it's time to land the plane a little bit more directly towards the panel that is coming afterwards. And here are the two words that I want to cover now: value and power. which basically are proxies for economics and politics, of course. On the economic side, there's one thing that is important, which is that data, digital data, is a very strange economic beast. It is something that is excludable, but non-rivalrous, meaning that it is amazingly appropriate for creating massive commons. You can share it without losing anything. If I give digital data to you, I still have it. But it can be excludable. You can put controls, access, you can put rights, you can put a lot of things. And this is a very particular situation in the theory of commons and in economy. But the important thing is that using the Goldilocks approach, if you take the two extremes, we do protect data in a lot of cases for very legitimate reasons. And there's no doubt about it. It can be privacy, it can be economic value, it can be security. And there are a lot of people who do amazing work promoting open data and access in commons. What I want to emphasize is that there is an enormously untapped source of value in between, which is the data that is protected, but that could be opened up without becoming completely open, because it would create value for different actors. And this is why the DataSphere initiative that I co-founded with Lorraine Porciuncula a few years ago has as its mission to responsibly unlock the value of data for all. And here I want to emphasize that one of the big challenges is often to combine social and economic value. And again, today the media and everything is exclusively about economic value, monetization of data, and so on. And the question of when do social and economic value combine and mutually reinforce each other, and when they are sometimes in tension, is a challenge that we've had for all of our economic history. And the question of the distribution of value is a fundamental challenge. When we were hunter-gatherers, distribution of the prey between the members of the tribe was a battle. When we were agriculture, the battle between the landlord and the peasants on the distribution of value is the same as the battle between the business owner and the workers in the industrial era. Today, we will have the same battles about the distribution of value for the digital economy, for the AI economy. And this is going to be an extremely intense battle because it covers the entire world. It happens at an extremely fast speed, and it is about an enormous amount of value. And so the challenge is, what is the digital society we want? One that increases the inequalities that we already witness, or one that has a chance of rebalancing it on the other end? And in that regard, I just want to quote the fact that the DataSphere initiative is going to release very soon the second atlas based on our observatory that documents more than 420, I think, entities and organizations that work on the question of data governance and sharing of data. The second question, because I see the time is running. So that was about value. This is going to be a major debate. And if we want to avoid that it becomes a fight, we need to address this as soon as possible. The last word is power. And here, I don't want to belabor. I could speak for ages. I spent 25 years in all the different environments dealing with digital issues at the international level. There's one underlying question in a nutshell, which is, do we have the right institutional tools to deal with the transnational issues of the digital age? And from the 25 years that I've spent in this, my answer is clearly no. I won't belabor, but the fundamental element is that we still work under a system that is based on one criteria only: citizenship. The entire pyramidal international architecture is based on your belonging to a particular country that is represented at the international level by one person, I've been one, and that's it. But humanity is not a collection of 190 very nice, it's not only a connection of 190 very nicely delineated territorial jurisdictions. Billions of organizations, of groups, are organizing our life, or we organize our life through them. Companies, associations, families, tribes, ethnicity, religious groups, whatever. Humanity is a network of network. It's a collection of heterogeneous human groups. And the conclusion should be relatively simple. If you have a networked society, you should have networked governance, not a pyramidal system only, which works for certain things. When you're talking about war and fight between state entities, all good. But for most of the topics that we're talking about here, this is not enough. Hence the whole question of how to develop something new. And here there's a natural idea. If you want to make interoperable heterogeneous human groups, why not take inspiration of what allowed to make interoperable heterogeneous technical networks or communications networks, i.e. the internet, a protocol that allows for this interoperability. So the challenge that we have in front of us is what is the protocol for allowing the interoperability and the dialogue between those different entities. We can call it the multi-stakeholder model. We can call it whatever we want. The goal is how do we interconnect humans so that they can address on an issue-by-issue basis with the right stakeholders the problems that they're facing together. And here, because the time is running, I want to highlight that one of those approaches is something that we're pushing at the DataSphere initiative, is the idea of sandboxes. Sandboxes, think of it in a certain way as contributing to this notion of protocol. It's something that brings the different actors together in a relationship that is not exactly the traditional relationship of regulator versus regulated, and so on. And as we're talking about bringing people together, I've spent the last 20 years plus promoting, as many of you know, the idea of the multi-stakeholder approach to things. And here I want to be honest. Just like the Goldilocks approach applies to what I've mentioned before, it applies here as well. Something that is exclusively a meeting of governments on any topic is much too little. But the proof is that in certain cases, as we sometimes see with ICANN, asking that everybody is in the room for every stage of every discussion on any topic is not a solution either. And I want here to give credit, as we're here celebrating 20 years of Cetic, and soon, unfortunately, I won't be there, celebrating 30 years of CGI.br and Nick.br. I am amazed by the work that you've accomplished here. And I'm sad beyond belief that this is not the model that has spread. It is a balanced one. It is not a perfect one, but it is a perfect illustration of what you can do when you care about managing a resource and leveraging its output for the common public interest. I visited, and Hartmut was kind enough to make me visit the facilities when I came for the Net Mundial Plus 10 last year. And actually, although we've interacted for more than 15 or 18 years, I don't even count, and didn't grasp the breadth of this. And here, I must say that I've been on the board of ICANN, and if ICANN had spent a tenth of the energy and the resources that it had to do what you've done here, or they have done here, with CGIBR and Cetic.br, we wouldn't have any problem explaining at the international level what the multi-stakeholder model is and what it is for and what it achieves. So I'm sad about it. But pragmatically, there's one thing that I want to finish with, because I'm already 30 seconds past. This model, we're not even at the stage where we're thinking about how to spread it most. We're at the moment where it is likely to be under threat, particularly because the WSIS plus 20 is happening this year. I don't expect much from there, but there's one thing that is important in the whole discussion, is that the IGF is like Oliver Twist, abandoned at birth by the parents, sheltered every year by benevolent countries that said, yes, we're paying for you to come, and Brazil has hosted it twice, but left basically starving, not giving it the whole potential. I think it's time to finish the job. It is time to give this organization a proper standing and to have a constitutional moment for the IGF, which is the only tool that we have that we can build upon, including with a network of local ones. So, final point, and I'm done. I couldn't have found a better company and a better environment to share those things with you. I want to say how grateful I am to Alejandro for the invitation. It was an opportunity to reconnect with deep friends, to once again express my admiration for the work that Cetic has accomplished and CGI and Cetic.br in the last 20, 30 years. And to really say that at this moment in time, in history, in the history of digital governance, more than ever, what you are doing is important and is an example that everybody should look at. And as far as I'm concerned, one of the benefits of this meeting is that not only did I have already great personal conversations with people yesterday, but I think it has finally forced me to confront the fact that I need to put that in right point or another. Thank you.
Muito obrigada, Sr. Bertrand. Ele permanecerá ao palco.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chappell. To moderate the debate, I would like to give the floor to Eugênio Vargas Garcia, who is Director of the Department of Science, Technology, Innovation, and Intellectual Property of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Welcome, Mr. Garcia. And to take part, now we have a group of experts for this debate. Mr. Carlos Eduardo Torres Freire, Director of the Center for Data Science for Public Statistics of SEAD Foundation. Ms. Maíra Silva, Executive Administrator at NOSI in Cabo Verde. Mr. Raul Echeverria, Executive Director of the Latin America Internet Association. And Mr. Sebastian Rovira, Economic Affairs Officer and Officer in charge of the Digital Transformation Unit in the Production, Productivity and Management Division of CEPAL. So, welcome. I would like to give the floor to the moderator and have a good debate. Good morning, everyone. Is it working? Fine. It will be a pleasure to moderate this panel talking about digital economy and data, everything within a perspective that we regard as fundamental, which is developing countries. Many debates take place when the global south is considered or its voice is underrepresented. So it's important to have that perspective of developing countries, Brazil included. So I would like to share with you a little bit of what Brazil has been doing international agenda in terms of digital governance, a slightly broader ranging theme. You remember that Brazil chaired the G20 in 2024, and we had a work group on digital economy with a Maceió statement about digital inclusion, specifically in which 4 themes were chosen as priority by the G20, including connectivity, and while it's not 100% saved in international fora and nationally too, and public digital infrastructure, electronic government, also information integrity. We are going to have a session on that. It was the first time that the theme was addressed at G20 as part of the group, and it was included in Maceió's statement. And the 4th priority was AI. So with this focus in terms of development and reduction of inequality and its adoption, we can evolve to deal with inequality. This was G20, now we are chairing the BRICS. So digital themes are also being discussed. Now there is a task force on AI that is discussing precisely a statement that will support the multi-stakeholder approach. So it will support the multi-stakeholder approach, and then we can have the ICTs with Daniel from the Ministry of Communications. The Ministry of Communications has been leading this debate, and there are some topics that are addressed as a priority: sustainability, space sustainability, as we have low orbiting satellites with a finite life, and space residues, the so-called space garbage, which may be a problem, environment, also sustainability, from environmental sustainability. And as a reminder, Brazil is going to host COP30 in November in Belém. All of this is a priority. And finally, in ICTs, we have the digital ecosystem, which is a broad-ranging agenda. And I would like to highlight 2 processes that are important this year and last year. The Global Digital Pact was adopted, and now it is being implemented, and there are a few tracks, including in AI, and we are going to have a designation of a scientific panel, international and independent, and also a global dialogue on AI governance. So this is going to be implemented and is being discussed right now. So as part of the pact, there is a database and a work group that is already beginning its activities to discuss data governance at the global level. So everything that we think of digital governance is either fragmented or non-existent. So this is a big challenge, and this is part of a discussion that we can have here during this session. And all of this is related to digital transformation of our societies. And our panelists are going to provide us different perspectives so that we can better understand where we are. Each one is going to have 7 minutes for initial presentation. There are some general questions, each one in their area of expertise, and we're going to talk about lessons learned in the last few years, policy priorities for digital strategies, what will mold the future of research in this area. So I'm going to start with our first panelist, Sebastian. Are you ready? Okay, so Sebastian, please, if you may comment a little bit from your perspective, even focusing on Latin American and Caribbean. So where we are, how do you see this going forward? Thank you so much, Eugenio. First of all, I'm going to apologize because I'll try and speak Portuguese. Before anything, I would like to start by praising Alexandre and Cetic for the work and for the 20 years and that I have followed along this process. Cetic has always been a very important partner for CEPAL and also for countries in Latin America. Many times, you see where we are and where we have to go. You define that, and this is something very important in Brazil that Cetic is capable of doing. There are many things, Eugene, that we thinking of digital transformation in Latin American countries in the last 20 years. If we were to summarize the positive trends and at the same time with lots of inequality, and then we have been investing in associate member. And at the same time, it's also very fragmented if we have depend a few differences. We cannot think that digital transformation, there are some structural things that we need to solve, and this is a danger of the digital transformation. Oftentimes, people think that this is going to solve everything, but it's not quite like that. This needs to be accompanied by many other policies that are much deeper in addition to digital transformation that is very important. If we could organize this in the main categories, at the level, at social level, if you want to, yesterday we had a panel on connectivity and meaningful connectivity. Connectivity has improved a lot, but we still have a long way to go. And I'm not going to go too much into this because yesterday we talked a lot about this. But at the more economic level, the digitalization of companies, last year we launched a study about the region, and there is still a very limited access in digital transformation, but it's not just about access. There's also something very important that sometimes we forget. And yesterday we were talking about this. Did you log in the internet in the last 3 months? It's related to intensity of use. This is something very important that we mustn't forget. This defines how much you can appropriate in digital transformation is the productive use. We should be reminded that our productivity in Latin America and Caribbean is about 30% of the US. So 30 years ago, it used to be 40%. So this tells us that other countries are moving forward and we haven't. This is very much related to digital transformation. 40 years ago, we talked a lot about transformation in sectors that are important. Well, sectors are still important, but digital transformation is increasingly more important for us to understand our capacity to have gains in productivity, better companies, stuff like that. And now we are developing a tool, an initiative that we have with the German cooperation. It's a lab for policies, digital policies, or rather saying digital transformation policies. Sometimes we have policies that are not evidence-based, but we are aware the policymakers do not have enough time to think what it is like. You need to do it, and that's it. So in our lab, inside the lab, we have a tool that is a simulator. And so we're trying to understand what is the change that some policies can do, some digital transformation policies and socioeconomic impact at different levels of the economy, especially in economic sectors of the countries of the region. This helps so that before taking action, you should think in which scenarios you can impact and how you can change things that you thought you were going to do in a different way. Well, this is important because we, particularly at the economic level, we still see low contribution to growth and productivity. That is very much related to the slow incorporation of digital transformation. In production processes, we thought about the internet, but it's much deeper. So, how you use and the use intensity. The second point is the low level of innovation and investment in technology that companies in the region still have. And the last is foreign dependence on, or the dependence on foreign technology. So the countries have capacity to do and this and that, but Latin America does not have capacity. The last point are the organizational aspects. So there are many days to develop new capacities. And sometimes we forget that, and this is also important. So there is technology, digital transformation. We need to adjust the organizational capacities to better understand and implement our wide-ranging strategies in the long term for the transformation that at the same time changes. So I think and this is my first intervention. So in conclusion, if we were to summarize, we still have an incomplete digital transformation in the countries in the region. With institutionality, it's still frail. So we still need to enter a public policies. And we need to strengthen the state capacities with coordinated strategies. So it's not so much that. This is much more concrete. Otherwise, there is the risk of reproducing the structural differences. Okay. Thank you very much, Sebastian. Well, certainly we have many challenges in Latin America and Caribbean, but also in other parts of the world. But that's why I wanted to call Maíra Silva, which brings to us the voice of Cape Verde and also the voice of Africa. We are very happy to have you here. Good morning, everybody. As Cesária Évora used to say, which is our musical voice in Cape Verde. Cape Verde is a little Brazil, as we used to say in Cape Verde, because of the similarities in terms of the looks, the culture, music, the niceness, friendliness, and many other reasons for which we relate very much and we identify with Brazilians and we kind of feel Brazilians. Cape Verde, if you don't know much about it, it is in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, where we are 10 islands spread. We have 500,000 inhabitants only, you're very small, but with big ambition and vision. In terms of digital transformation, we have a great vision, which is, and I say this because this is very important, to know where we are going to. In this manner, we are going to create a highway and ingredients to go forward. So Cape Verde wants to be a reference or a digital hub in Western Africa. So in terms of goals, we already have designed our goals. And our government has defined that by 2030, we need to have 80% of our public services need to be online. And by 2024, we had the challenge of being attaining 60%, which makes us hurry. And I am here representing the company Nosy. I am part of the board of directors. We are, and the main engine, one of the main engines to accelerate this transformation towards that goal. I would like to say that Cape Verde, we have more than 25 years of experience with electronic transformation, and we are model in Africa because currently we have two data centers in the main island, Santiago, and recently we opened a new data center that will be a replica. This shows the importance and priority that country assigns to technological structure, including data, which are key pieces for the digital transformation of the world and artificial intelligence. And the numbers of Cape Verde are in Cape Verde. I did this because it's not the case of many countries, especially in Africa, that they don't even have data in a sovereign way in the country, and this is a problem that Africa has. Very early on, we decided to create our own interoperability platform. Today, our platform communicates with all entities of the digital ecosystem in our country. Very early on, Cape Verde bet on that, and we have our own platform for the development of public services and Cape Verde, and the platform has been created by Cape Verdean technicians, local specialists. It's homemade, it's Cape Verdean, and we are very proud of that. Cape Verde has a very good penetration rate, and I'm going to demystify this, and we have good accessibility to services, whether we get to our population. And in terms of training, which is something very important, this is a priority for Cape Verde, and we have our training problems in terms of education. We explained this very well yesterday in terms of the priorities, in terms of education, especially for children. We have a lab that includes all secular schools in Cape Verde, which is a lab for children to have contact with technology through the development of robotic solutions. Uh, of course, everything is very basic, but at least the children are in contact with emerging technologies. And we also have more than 150 digital squares in Cape Verde, completely free of charge, and we are betting on digital inclusion. And because we are this reference, we are helping other countries in Africa, especially Portuguese-speaking countries, in the digital transformation. Of course, we have many other challenges in our continent. We try to implement these models, and there are cases of use in Saint Tome, Guinea-Bissau, Angola, and we are trying to help our Portuguese-speaking brothers to join us in a digital transformation and touching on AI. This is our priority. We do not have a strategic plan for the implementation of AI, but the government of Cape Verde is paying attention at that, and we are aligned with the African strategy. And I think that we did this last year, just as with the European Union. These are my contributions. Next question. I hope I can contribute more. Thank you so much.
Obrigado, Mayra.
Thank you, Myra. It was very important to hear you, and we are going to continue this discussion to learn more about the experiences about Cape Verde and the hurdles or obstacles that you come across. We're going to go back to this. Now let's move to Echeverria. And as a reminder, when in his initial address, Bertrand mentioned the Pope, that is Peruvian. He was born in the US, but he's also Peruvian. So he's kind of another Latin American Pope. So we are going to go deeper on this. This is important about Latin American, Caribbean, and using what Sebastian mentioned and what Raul is going to say to us. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Cetic, for the invitation to be here on this event, this celebration. I would like to congratulate you for your 20th anniversary, doing important work, producing information, data, evidence for the development of public policies in our region. I am a proud member, and I'm greatly honored to take part of being part of the advisory board of Cetic. So I am very happy with the celebration. Now I'm going to take a minute of how I can relate the Pope to what I had thought. Well, give me a minute, please. Well, the Pope is worried about AI. Well, this is the first step. Well, thank you. Well, Cetic has shared with us a few pieces of information in preparation for this panel, and one of the things is that we are 13% of the companies in Brazil are using AI. So, this is certainly a reliable number, a reliable information. But we can see this from a different perspective. What I have recently seen that research done in a different continent saying that 84% of the people using AI, but most of them do not know that they are using AI. And I think something similar happens to companies. When we look at the digital economy, and yesterday someone was saying that we should take out the word digital because everything is digital today. So same thing happens to economy. We should think the digital transformation and the digital development as a tool for participation, of the inclusive participation of society in economy. It's not the digital economy. When we saw small businesses, small stores, and individual businesses, people taking part in digital platforms, they're also using AI, and they are using the advantages of AI to improve their operations. And this is a quality, and they're using the opportunities of education. So this is another perspective. I had to say this. Does it mean that we don't have much to do? No, much to the opposite. We have a lot of work to do. But it's a different way of looking at that. One advantage of the digital transformation is for Latin America and Brazil and the region is that this is an opportunity that we did not have in the past to build more inclusive development models. I really liked what you said. The videos that you are showing between sessions with testimonials of young people, some of them living away from the main cities in Brazil, sharing their experiences. And this is one of the opportunities that we have with the take opportunity with digital development to people and businesses, to society as a whole, and include people that did not have the opportunity before, either because of the gender gap, geography gap, or other barriers in many sectors in society. So this is an opportunity that is very, very important in Latin America to have different development models that are more inclusive. It's not that technology will solve everything, but there is an opportunity that technology can help in that direction. Let's talk a little bit about Brazil. I think that Brazil is doing things well, very well. It's the country in the region that is the biggest one. In last year, there were 45 and 23 of those were in Brazil. There were two startups that were about to become e-commerce. So Brazil has 45 e-commerce platforms. And some people in Brazil are not really familiar with gaming, creative economy, Quinto Andar in real estate agency. So a company created by a Colombian in Brazil, and it's one of the biggest digital banks in Brazil. So there are many opportunities, and this is important for artificial intelligence and opportunities. And I'm going to leave this for the second round. But there are a few developments, such as digital financial inclusion with PIX, the automatic transaction. This is something sometimes how public policies and regulations can be a barrier, and other times it can be an enabler and a driver for development. So PIX is a demonstration evidence of how public policy can have a very positive impact in the world. This has given opportunity for small companies to take part in economy through the digital development. And just in closing, I see Brazil as a ecosystem of lots of entrepreneurship, very vibrant entrepreneurship, more vibrant than other regions, and this is important when we bring policies from other parts of the world. In the last 20 years, Brazilian economy has grown about 150%. and in the last 20 years, the European economy grew 40%. So we need to make the most of it. There is an opportunity for us to develop our own models of public policies to support the development for the benefit of society. And these public policies should be a model for other regions, for other parts of the world, and not the opposite, in terms of bringing public policies that do not help in digital development or the economy in other regions. Thank you so much. Thank you, Raul.
Thank you. We have to proceed right away to our next panelist, Carlos Eduardo, who is Director of Public Statistics for SEAD, which is a Brazilian foundation in the state of São Paulo. And also to go along the same lines of private sector in artificial intelligence, what companies are doing. What is your take? Thank you, Eugenio, and good morning, everyone. I also would like to congratulate Cetic for this amazing work that they have been conducting, and I have witnessed all their efforts in the past 20 years as a user, as a partner. Congrats, Alexander, Fabio, Graziella, and the whole Cetic team, to whom we have a very interesting type of dialogue. And I'm here wearing a production hat. I am a researcher, and we are always trying to think and find a way to measure all the things that happen in front of us. And the use of AI by companies, it's not an easy phenomenon. It's not a very easy task to have it measured. First, because I believe that you all have heard about examples of what is the use of AI at companies. But here we have different things, which are consumers' tools where generative AI, machine learning, marketing, sales, group of clients, recommendations of shopping, sales, human resources. We have what is quite controversial, which is the use of AI to recruit people in finances, as Raul well mentioned. We have companies which are native digitals. I'm sorry, digital natives, like is the case of Nubank in logistics. We also have clear examples of how we may have savings on fuel, saving time, thanks to models that will guide us to take the best ways or the best places to storage products. The industry is being changing, especially large size industries which are working with the sensors, computational vision models for their inventory analysis, production line corrections, thanks to the technology. So we have, as you can see, the sphere is so great, and we have to know what to do and how to ask, how to prompt. So we are prompting someone in a company if that company uses AI. What have we been doing then? At SEAD Foundations, we have a research about the use of AI in the state of São Paulo. We have a published chapter of ICTs and also OECD in English. Cetic has the company's ICT and I have been honored to participate at this group of research. So the phenomenon, the elements, they keep changing, and we have to find the best way to reach whatever we need for our correspondent to bring the necessary information. And why is it so necessary to carry out researches like that, to allow public policy, science, innovation? We are going to go into regulatory aspects, what are companies doing,
nesse âmbito, e também políticas de qualificação profissional, políticas para o mercado de trabalho.
and also policies for the market.
Como o Raul já adiantou,
and as Raul said, the 2024 ICTs says that 13% of Brazilian companies, they use AI. What does that mean? It means that if companies are using some of the applications that we have on a list, using logistics, use of chat box, use for process changes, and the company responds if they make use of that application or not.
Cria essa categoria de que a empresa usa inteligência artificial. A nossa pesquisa de
Our
São Paulo em 2020,
research in São Paulo back in 2023 amounted 8%. That research was conducted right in the beginning of OpenAI, ChatGPT, November 22. In Brazil, we got it here in March. So our data collection started in this period of time. Cetic ICT research 2024, 13%. According to Eurostat, Brazil is not so different from other countries. Of course, that Denmark, Finland, Norway, Belgium, and Holland and Germany, which they are within 20% of companies that use AI. Brazil sums up 13, which is close to France and other countries.
Mas o que é importante é a gente aprofundar isso.
But let's go deep into this overview. We have to better characterize the use.
Empresas trazem para a gente que grande problema, uma grande dificuldade, grande
This is a great challenge to use AI is not to be able to measure the return over the investment. Another challenge is professional qualification and the impact of AI in the world and with labor force. I'm going to talk about that in the next round because my time is almost up. But to tell you about the difficulty to measure it, there is another factor, which is another obstacle. In addition to talking to companies to ask and know what they are doing, and 13% is a low percentage, fine, but we also know that people are using generative AI in their daily lives, and that is not a policy nor institutional approach. And we also have to understand how are we going to measure the impact of technologies with the labor force. And these are my first intakes and insights about the topic. Thank you.
We are running out of time, actually. So now turn to English. I want to bring our good Bertrand to the discussion, because in your talk, you mentioned the need for cooperation. We have a very challenging international environment today, polarization, binary politics, this us versus them mindsets. And you said coexistence, yeah, of course, because since in cyberspace, everything is connected. And you give the example of digital data, that digital data can be shared in a win-win interaction. It's not a zero-sum game where I win, you lose. No, all sides win. So I mentioned before the implementation for the Global Digital Compact, but I also have the review process for the WISIS Plus 20 and the future of the IGF, the Internet Governance Forum. And of course, we are in São Paulo, where we have last year the Net Mundial Plus 10, when the São Paulo guidelines for the multi-stakeholder model, they were adopted here in this city. So my question for you, Bertrand, looking ahead, how do you see the global digital ecosystem evolving over the next few years in terms of challenges and prospects for a more inclusive and sustainable digital transformation. So I know it's just very broad, but just for you to share with us your feeling and your views on this. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And it is the topic that I'm most interested in for more than 20 years. And I think the question of the institutional architecture for dealing with digital issues is not sufficiently addressed. We try to basically have a hammer to turn a screw, if you see what I mean, like using the wrong tool for the new problems. As I mentioned earlier, it's a very good way to ask the question. I said the network society needs network governance. One of the fears that I have is the proliferation of initiatives and at the same time a desire to have a one central controlling element that will deal with those things. What I find fascinating about the IGF is that it's not only one event every year, it has generated the proliferation of, I think, 160 at the moment, national and regional IGF that have emerged spontaneously. They are very unruly. They are not all at the same level. They're not all the same capacity. But if there were a real effort to organize the discussion among them and to feed into the global IGF, that would be a networked governance thing that would be much better than creating a one single high-level panel. I mean, I like commissions, but people have to be, a little bit like the model of the European Union in the very early years. You had a high authority with 12 people working all year long to deal with one topic. And they were coming from the different countries that participated in the early coal and iron community. And they were tasked with finding the European common interest and to explain to the governments that the balance between the obligations that were asked from them and the benefits that were the result were properly apportioned. We miss this. We do not have, on those topics, something that can have at least a moral authority to say a global public interest. International organizations that I respect tremendously, and I respect the people who work in them at this current environment, they are not recognized by governments as having a voice that can speak for the global public interest. And it's not easy to define a global public interest. You need procedures, you need a lot of things. But you need a network of things that communicates with each other. I was mentioning earlier the fact that at the DataSphere initiative, we push a lot the notion of using sandboxes. And you may know that in the case of AI, for those of you who are not familiar, the AI Act in Europe will ask every single country in the European Union by mid-2026 to have one AI sandbox, a place for experimentation, for a little bit too much verifying compliance, but at least to explore a better understanding between regulatory authorities, startups, and providers of solutions. This is absolutely essential, and we have launched, actually in Rio last year, a global forum on sandboxes. And for the last 2 years, we're running in Africa, a Africa Forum on sandboxes for data. And it's absolutely fascinating to look at the local experiments, the national cases where people have developed sandboxes to change the way you interact between public authorities and private actors. We cannot continue to develop regulations the way we used to do it, what I call the fire and forget regulation. Like you spend 5 years trying to perfectly finesse the solution to the problem and then run the regulation forever or at least for 20 years. This doesn't work. The landscape is changing so much. Yanis Kaklins yesterday was reminding us, I was in WSIS in 2000, 2003 and 2005, there was no Facebook. There was no mobile phones. And it's 20 years. And the speed at which the AI is evolving, the impact on society is going to be absolutely massive. We need to find as many places to have this real dialogue. And in this regard, I think when we're talking about developing or developing countries, we need to make a very important distinction. One is there are legacy problems that make it difficult to catch up. That's absolutely true. And it is extremely difficult to solve. The question I've not found a correct answer to is, are there places where it will be possible to leapfrog, as the expression has been used, like catch up in certain fields and establish a beachhead in the new space? That's one problem, and it's an important one. But the second one is, from all the interactions that I've had with people in various parts of the world, there's no lack of understanding of what the value system should be to deal with those issues. So just like our democracy is based on the fact that everybody has the same vote, I think it should be easy to recognize that everybody has the same right to contribute, not the same right to shout, not the same right to object, not the same right to oppose, but the right to contribute, and the capacity to contribute is coming, that's from all countries, including developing countries, because the whole message about the distribution of value, if we develop this technology without putting at the very beginning, as we move, the question of how to develop it safely, how to make sure that the general trajectory of our society is remaining in the Goldilocks zone of sustainability. Sorry to bring the expression again, but there are dangers on both sides. If we stop those things, we are losing a lot of opportunities. But if we do it without any control, we can have consequences that we absolutely do not anticipate correctly. And so it is a policy question. And I think the more spaces, the more places there will be to facilitate the discussion and feed into the international process, the better. This is why, when I was talking about, to finish, a constitutional moment for the IGF, I would dream that by 2026 or 27 at the latest, a restructured IGF with a new reaffirmed mandate becomes the router, the central hub for the dialogue that will be nurtured by all the national and regional IGFs, so that an ongoing dialogue, the new public place or space, can be created in a way that is more distributed. The solution is not one committee in the UN, it is a network of entities. And I was mentioning the forum on, the Africa Forum on sandboxes. I would love, and we are here with Lorraine, if you want to discuss it, we would love to think about creating the same thing for Latin America, because there are a lot of things that can be shared and experimented in countries that precisely have different perspectives than what the Silicon Valley environment is.
Thank you, Bertrand.
I don't know if it answers your question.
I think this is an ongoing discussion. The global digital governance is really a common endeavor that we need to face. In 2025, there is a window of opportunity, but the problem is there is a storm outside. So we open the window, we see a storm, and so, but we need to deal with it, and we find the best way.
If I may, this is exactly, and sorry for picking the mic again. This is exactly why I started my presentation with those two values. It takes, and I repeat it, it takes persistence and a form of moral conviction to withstand this storm. I mean, honestly, I'm 67, and honestly, I've been pushing this thing for 20 years. And I'm ashamed to say that the results are not as good as I would have hoped. In 2005, those of us who were there, we thought we had created what is actually the only innovation, institutional innovation, in more than 20 years. The IGF, period, done. That's all. In 20 years, not a single agreement at the global level has been reached. I mean, a real substantive agreement has been reached through the international system. The only one, and it's an absolutely supreme irony, is a treaty against cyber criminality proposed by one of the countries that is the main actor in cybercrime. I'm sorry. So I honestly believed, I left the French Foreign Affairs Ministry in 2000 because I saw in 2001, because I knew that the World Summit on the Information Society was going to come. I engaged in civil society because I believed that the multi-stakeholder model was the future, because I had experienced the G8 dot force that was created by the Japanese government. It was my first experience of having a group where governments, private actors, civil society, international organizations were around the table. And it was like a revelation. I spent 20 years pushing this, and the results are not there yet. But we need to prod along. And if we don't believe that it is achievable, it will never happen.
Obrigado, Bertrand, por estar aqui conosco, também compartilhando. E nós, na verdade, estamos com pouco tempo.
Well, in fact, we are short of time. We cannot go for a second round of questions. So now let's open to the audience. And feel free to add any additional comments if you have any. We might have time and maybe for one or two questions from our participants. There is someone with a mic.
Por favor, faça a pergunta.
Bom dia, eu sou Fernanda, diretora do Internet Lab.
I am a director of Internet Lab. My name is Fernanda, and my question is to Bertrand. We have been quite worrisome for this run to AI, and then we see a retraction in the open source data. Both the private sector platforms, they are closing their APIs, and also governments, Elon Musk, empowering all the database and getting it, and even museums inventories with this retraction moment. What is your opinion about the risk to have less open data source, and how can the ecosystem or multilateral entities are doing in face of this risk of retraction? Have you noticed any movement in that direction?
Thank you. That's a very important question. Two points quickly. One is open data. Or open availability of data, and the other one is on open source AI, which is an important thing that I'm happy to be able to mention. On the question of data, as I said, sorry, Goldilocks again, it's very good to protect some. If you can keep the light in the room, I prefer to see people, actually. Thank you. Not everything has a vocation to be open data. A lot of things that are closed data shouldn't be. I don't know if I get into trouble at one point, but I cannot but rejoice to see that finally a lawsuit has been filed in the US against the scientific publication industry. It has been a scandal for decades. I don't know what the lawsuit will be, but if one thing should be available more openly, it's scientific publications. And the only thing is, I hope that that doesn't mean that there will not be a redistribution of money and remuneration for the researchers. So the question is, when should things be open and when should they be closed? And when they are closed, when are they partially accessible? And one of the things that we're working on, and Lorraine is harping on me all the time because it's a work that is long overdue, is that we're developing a guide for people who want to develop communities, data communities charters. When you have a group of actors who want to share data or share access to data, they have a list of questions that they need to ask themselves before starting and embarking into such an endeavor. And we're trying to produce this. So not everything should be open data. And again, I mentioned the observatory and the atlas that we're going to release soon, because you will have a long list of actors who are doing this kind of work on data access. Quickly, on the question of open source AI, it is an extremely complex question because the term is a little bit abusive. Open source AI is not exactly the same thing as open source software. The feedback loop is not the same, as far as I understand. I may be corrected, but the beauty of open source software is it's completely shared, and any edit is being brought back after verification into improving the common product. As far as I understand, the open source AI is mainly about the capacity to reuse the model freely, but the conditions of reintegrating something in the model in the first place are not set in the same way at all. And there are so many risks of making the availability of an extremely powerful and constantly more powerful tool to absolutely anybody without control. That gives me pause. At the same time, again, a totally controlled system is limiting the possibilities of innovation and giving undue control to an extractive industry that may gather all the resources for itself. So I think it's important to distinguish the two. The second one, on what is the right model, I do not have the right balance or the right solution. But the two criteria that I mentioned in the first place, which is how can we create cooperation and how to make sure that we stay in the right middle zone, should be the guiding angles for discussing those things. But the second point of open source AI is a very important one, a chain of liability as well.
Obrigado, Bertrand. Nós só temos tempo para mais uma pergunta que está aqui na frente, foi um dos primeiros a levantar a mão. Bom.
Just one question. Thank you so much. My name is Beatrice, and I have a question for Sebastian. So we see a transformation in the region, in Latin America and Caribbean. And I would like to hear from you, considering that organizations that are funding, providing funding and organizations, since they are the same, maybe shouldn't we have a regional digital transformation strategy? Is there anything underway in that direction? Well, thank you very much for the question. We have been trying to have more regional strategies. So we should think about sub-regional spaces and Pacific alliances and everything. What happens in the region? You don't have any enforcement. It's not like EU that you could do something. And Bertrand also talked about cooperation. So in Latin America, we need to advance at different levels of cooperations. One thing is political cooperation that we need to have to advance, to have a common vision, in a vision of Latin America and global steps that we need. And for Latin America. But at the same time, we need something very concrete for the needs of the population and companies and society. I think that one thing that we should do would be to do very specific regional projects. Not just, we think about projects for the development, technology development, development, something that could be slightly more difficult. But there are lots of spaces for us to start working. And now what we have with the development of AI, this is even more important because then we need to have things like technological infrastructure that we need to develop, and there are many things associated, regional data centers, and these things are also important in addition to political dialogue and how you need to have this more political. So I think that you are absolutely right. The thing is that we need a country organization that could and at the same time, the regional spaces could also provide that. And we could advance that. And also Mercosur and Caribbean, also because we need, and I really liked what you said, that things are ever changing, are always changing. We talk about the digital transformation and digitalization, but we need to start talking not just about digitalization, but algorithmization of the company. I don't know if this is a word, but we also need to develop new tools, and you need to prove and start developing more regional things that you need complementation rather than development. Thank you, Sebastian. Before giving it over to Mayra, Raul, would you like to say something? Or Carlos? Well, please feel free to complement and trying to close. Well, thank you. I was thinking about the opportunities and regional strategies and thinking about AI. There is a lot happening in the region. There are many very successful initiatives in logistics. I do not see any reason, and we are also free, and some things that we do well. There is no reason why Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay are not global leaders in the application of AI in culture. Why can't Cape Verde be a global leader in the use of AI in tourism? So this is an area that we need to work on. We need to have public support, support for innovation. We just in Paris summit, there is no public interest without public investment. And lastly, about the Paris summit, it was very good. It's good to see that geopolitical changes in the world are also impacting not just in the construction of our regional and national strategies for the region, and then we have strategies of other regions with changes for new regions and now having a more active role and providing opportunity. So, in closing, Carlos, well, as a follow-on on what Raul said, there's an opportunity. And talking about Brazil specifically, we have a major challenge to work with AI. So in Brazil, we have one or two additional benefits. We have a population that we have 30% of functional illiterate persons. So these people probably will not be able to work with AI and will hardly use it. So we have a very serious problem with regards to education. And we have another challenge, which is aging of the population. So we kind of missed a demographic window, and now we need to go after it in a different way. And the other way, which is an opportunity that will have to be addressed by public policies, is professional requalification. So there will be an undereducated population with difficulty to use AI, and aging population that has longer, they're living longer. However, this longer time needs to be useful in the digital age. And as Raul and Sebastian said, I think that we have very interesting sectorial opportunities to look at Latin America. I don't think that overall opportunities, if we look at agriculture, the new financial industry, there are other opportunities to work and deal with these problems, which are good for the use of AI. Now, the last word, if I were to indicate a defect in this panel, gender disparity, 5 men and just 1 woman. So I did it on purpose. You are the last one to speak for us to wrap up. Well, before addressing gender parity very rapidly, I'm going to go back to what Carlos said. It's about human capital. So I asked this to me, which Africa do we want? Focusing on the region where I live. And once again, Africa is in the dark. So literacy rate is very, very low in Africa in general. How can we compete in this titanic effort for the implementation of artificial intelligence and data once again? 80% of the data from Africa outside Africa, they're not even in Africa. How can we create our models? How can our story, our technology, our culture, and not be biased in terms of what we have today is this disparity. And lastly, touching on something very important, how can we compete with an Africa that has 20% women that finish university? So we are way, way beyond or below falling short. And unfortunately, very sadly, Africa is still not being able to use technologies and not having the right strategies for us to expedite and to have equity in terms of gender. So this is our panel. We are ending this excellent debate. We would like to thank very much our debates, and we are going to invite you to the center for a photograph. And while we take pictures, I would like to remind that the publication TIC Domicílios, TIC Online, TIC Saúde, and TIC Empresas, all of them related to the ICT health homes are available on the way out from the theater, and they are also available in our website for you to download.
Oi, eu sou Amanda, moro em
Hi.
no Rio Grande do Sul e tenho 20 anos. Os aplicativos que eu abro todos os dias é sem dúvida o Instagram, o WhatsApp. Para minha geração, essa relação de rede social, seja com amigo, seja com alguém que se admira, seja com pais, seja com familiares, eu acho que ela é muito tênue, tanto para a parte ruim e para a parte boa. Então, para mim, por exemplo, que moro longe dos meus pais, eu estou a 500 quilômetros da minha cidade, é muito boa, porque eu tenho essa relação de proximidade, consigo fazer uma ligação de vídeo, conversar, eu consigo matar um pouco da saudade. O papel da internet durante a pandemia foi essencial, porque ela foi tanto importante para que eu pudesse continuar estudando, quanto para manter minha relação com o mundo. Então, às vezes, acaba sendo uma relação muito fria, porque ali tu, dentro da rede social, não só com as pessoas que tu conhece, mas com pessoas que às vezes tu nem conhece, tu tem que lidar com certo comentário, com certa crítica, com certos falares, com certas falas que não te agradam naquele momento. De alguma maneira, a gente está exposto ali.
Bom, peço a gentileza que, por favor, retomem seus assentos,
I
pois
kindly
passaremos
request you to go
agora
back to your seats, and now
ao
we are
painel
going
temático
to have
Integridade da
our first
Informação na
key
Era da
session,
Inteligência Artificial,
Information
que
Integrity in the
discutirá
Age
os
of AI,
desafios e as
that will discuss the
potencialidades para a
challenges
produção de
and potential
evidências e
for the
de
production
indicadores
of evidence and
confiáveis
reliable
para embasar
indicators
a
to support
implementação
the
e o
implementation and
monitoramento de
monitoring
políticas
of policies
relacionadas à
related
agenda da
to the
integridade da
Information
informação.
Integrity Agenda.
Entre os tópicos
Topics
abordados estão
covered
as formas de
include
avaliar
how
as
to
práticas de
access
consumo de
people's
informação das
information
pessoas,
practices,
suas
their
capacidades e habilidades
capabilities and
para
abilities
identificar
to
conteúdo
identify
enganoso
misleading
e suas
content, and their
percepções sobre os
perception of
ecossistemas de informação.
information
E
ecosystems.
para moderar o
To
painel,
moderate this
convido ao
panel, I would
palco a
like to
senhora
give the floor
Patrícia
to
Campos Melo,
Patricia
que é
Campos Melo,
repórter especial da
who
Folha de
is
São
a special
Paulo e
reporter of the
comentarista da TV
newspaper
Cultura.
Folha de São
Bem-vinda, senhora
Paulo and
Patrícia.
a commentator at TV Cultura.
Para compor o debate,
And then,
contamos com os
fellow
seguintes
panelists, we
especialistas
have the
convidados a quem chamo ao
following
palco.
guests,
Senhora Júlia
experts.
Tucci,
Ms. Julia
pesquisadora de
Tucci,
pós-doutorado em um programa
postdoc
PEDIC com a
researcher at
UFRJ
IBCT with
e pesquisadora visitante na
UFRJ
Alliance of
and visiting professor in the
Biodiversity
Alliance
and
of Biodiversity and CIAT.
Senhor Guilherme Canella,
Mr.
diretor da
Guilherme
Divisão de
Canella,
Inclusão e
Director
Políticas
of the
Digitais
Inclusion
e
and Digital
Transformação Digital
Policies
na
and
Unesco.
Digital Transformation for UNESCO.
Senhor João Caldeira
Mr.
Brante
João
Monteiro
Caldeira
de
Brante
Castro,
Monteiro de
secretário de
Castro,
Políticas Digitais da
Secretary
Secretaria de
for Digital
Comunicação Social da
Policies of the
Presidência
Social
da
Communication
República.
Secretariat of the Presidency of Brazil.
Senhora Molly
Ms.
Lesher,
Molly
chefe
Lesher,
interina da Divisão de
Interim
Conectividade
Head of the Digital
Economia e
Connectivity
Sociedade
Division,
da OCDE.
Economy and Society of the OECD.
E senhora Nina da
And
Hora,
Ms.
diretora
Nina da
executiva do
Hora,
Instituto da Hora e
CEO
colunista
of
do MIT
Institute da Hora
Technology
and
Review
columnist
Brasil.
of
Bem-vindas e
MIT
bem-vindos.
Brazil.
Passo então a palavra à
You're
moderadora e desejo
welcome. I'll give the
excelente
floor
debate
to
a
the
vocês.
moderator, and I wish you an
Obrigada. Vocês me
excellent
ouvem, não?
debate. Thank you so
Bom
much.
dia a todos.
Can you hear me?
Prazer
Good
estar aqui. Meu nome
morning,
é
everyone.
Patrícia
It's a
Campos Melo,
pleasure
sou
to be
jornalista da
here.
Folha.
I am Patricia
E
Campos Melo. I'm
sobre
a
integridade
journalist
de
at Folha,
informação na era da
and
IA,
I'll talk about
nunca foi
information
tão
in the
relevante quanto agora, está
AI
cada vez
age. It
mais
has never been
relevante. A
so
gente está
relevant, and it's
passando por
going
um
to
cenário
become
muito
increasingly more
desafiador
relevant. We
em
are
defesa da
faced with a very
integridade da
challenging
informação, né, para
scenario
além
to
de todas
defend
as complexidades que
information
abarcou o
integrity,
ecossistema de
in
informação
addition to all
falado, a gente vê uma
complexities, to keep a
ofensiva de
healthy
determinados governos e
information
organizações técnicas
ecosystem.
para
There
bloquear
are
a
some governments
regulação,
being very
digamos
aggressive
assim,
to block
contra a pesquisa em
regulation, against
desinformação que é
research
consentida pelos pesquisadores,
on
contra a
misinformation,
moderação de conteúdo.
and
Então, qualquer
against
tentativa aí de
content
regulação.
moderation and any
E
attempt
com
of
esse avanço
moderation.
avassalador da inteligência
And
artificial,
with
isso se
this
transforma cada vez
overwhelming
mais
advance of
complexo.
AI,
Para
things
nossa
are going to
sorte, temos
become
aqui algumas
increasingly
das
more
mentes mais
complex.
brilhantes estudando esse
Fortunately,
assunto
we
para
have one
nos
of the most
iluminar.
brilliant minds
A gente vai
studying
começar,
this
cada um de
here
vocês vai
with
ter
us.
8 minutos
Each
na fala
one of you
inicial.
is
Eu vou
going
ser
to have
a
8
chata da
minutes for your
microfone,
initial
a vizinha.
address. I'm going
E
to
depois a
tell
gente faz
you
uma rodada de
when
perguntas,
8
depois
minutes are
abre o
gone, then we have
microfone.
around the questions, and then we open to the
Então, eu queria
audience.
começar com o
So I
Guilherme
would like to
Canella.
start with
Guilherme, me fala
Guilherme Canella.
direito seu novo
Guilherme,
cargo. Eu estava com
please,
o
what's your
cargo
new
antigo,
position? I had the former
e agora
position.
então você é diretor.
So now you're a director.
O sistema das Nações Unidas não,
The
às vezes
UN
comete erros,
system
inclusive de
sometimes
criação de
make
cargos.
mistakes
Então
even
deram
when they create
título de
positions.
5 linhas que eu vou
So
gastar
I
alguns
have a
8 minutos dizendo
five-line
que
position.
transformação digital é
Director of
suficiente.
digital
Maravilhoso.
transformation will
Então você
suffice.
tem seus 8 minutos agora, limpos.
So
Sem
you have
desconto.
8 minutes, no discounts.
Mas eu falo em geral ou assim?
Em geral, eu posso também
You
te
can make a
estimular com
general
uma
address,
pergunta.
and I can ask you a
Você
question.
que
Well,
vocês na Unesco têm feito esse
you at
trabalho
UNESCO have
precioso de
been
sistematização,
doing
né,
this
e
precious work of
compartilhar consenso sobre o que
systematizing
funciona em termos
and
de
trying to
regulação.
generate
O que a
consensus
gente
of
já
what works in
sabe
terms of
no
regulation.
mundo sobre o
What
que é
do
o
we
estado da
already
arte
know
em
in the world?
políticas
What is the
para
state of the art in terms
conservar a
of
integridade da
policies
informação?
to
E há
conserve the
certo
integrity
consenso, se
of
você pode falar
information?
do consenso nesse aspecto.
Is there any consensus there?
Obrigado, bom dia a todos e a
Thank
todas.
you.
Prazer
Good
estar de
morning,
volta aqui
everyone.
nesse
It's a pleasure
palco,
to be back
nessas
here
discussões tão
on this
interessantes
stage
que
for such
nós estamos
interesting
tendo
discussions
hoje.
that we're having,
Vou fazer
or
uma
we've been having
pequena,
since
uma
yesterday.
pequena,
It's just
como
a
fez o Bertrand, uma pequena
as
digressão
Bertrand did,
histórica.
as a short
Nós já
historical
tivemos mais
digression.
recentes dessa discussão
In more recent years of the discussion, there is an informational system that we used to call the public sphere, more broadly speaking, and then we called informational ecosystem. This discussion that starts at the UN with the letter from the United Nations on the first general meeting of the UN, the first resolution says, information freedom is the freedom upon which all other liberties or freedoms in this letter are based on. So right from the beginning, the free flow of information was central for human rights. And in the same year, and we are celebrating the 80 years of the United Nations and UNESCO this year, right in the first paragraph, there was a discussion of UNESCO that the mandate granted to us is a mandate to protect the free flow of information. I'm not going to go over the entire history of the 80 years, but in the last 30 years, especially after 1981, after the end of the Cold War, there was an opportunity of rethinking protection of freedom of speech and the liberty of the press, more specifically. So there was a global meeting that there are three central pillars and ideas that we need to protect means, and means were you, the newspapers, the media, better saying, that would be free, independent, and plural. And now this has gained lots of strength, this idea, which is a central idea, even though we didn't call it like that in the past. Now, taking a leap 30 years later in 2021, again, we said freedom, plurality, and independence are still fundamental, but it's not enough for us to understand the dimension of the problem. So when we had the 30 years later meeting, we had a strong idea that information is a public asset. Raul, who's here, was one of the drafters of Vinduc plus 30. And then we added three important components that are core for us to discuss the integrity of information. We need to qualify the demand for good quality information. This is, it should at least be verified and have some truthfulness that is objective. And what does this mean? This means that we need to empower people. Media literacy and everything. This is a necessary condition, but it's not sufficient. We need to empower people, but it's unfair to say that the answer is just with people when we have a company, $1 trillion. So we also needed to empower the offer of good quality information. And offering means protecting you, journalists, scholars, researchers, influencers, whoever is including good quality information into the system. And we need to protect, to provide financial feasibility, but just protecting offer is no longer enough. It's necessary, but not enough. So there was a third discussion, which is what to do with transmission systems or organization systems, the social network platforms, chats, and everything. And here the main discussion is what is the governance of the system. And this discussion has gained many important elements in the last 3-4 years. Some of them are still very divergent, but there is some convergence. Transparency, multi-stakeholderism, accountability. So to me, so we're asking what is working, what is not. So there is a very clear standard with the Global Digital Act. UNESCO has proposed some guidelines that are related to Vinduk 1991 and Vinduk 2021. I think that Molly is going to talk about her own perspective about this matter. Now, the main challenge is the following. We are still missing coherence and synergy that are very interesting happening about media information literacy. There is a real impact in terms of public policies and so on and so forth. But when we look at the set of other countries to find a national media and information literacy policy demonstrating its impact, it's very difficult. In addition to pilot projects with lifelong education. There are successful policies for the protection of journalists, scientists, and artists here and there, but it's not a coherent set of policies in all spaces. The theme of economic feasibility of journalism, it's still not resolved with serious consequences for democracy. And from the standpoint of companies, digital platforms, AI, and as important, the relationship of governments with the companies and how much this is regulated using international standards for human rights to protect the freedom of speech, the right to speak, and to seek and receive information are related to other human rights, childhood rights. We could talk about women, immigrants. This is also related to good experiences related to regulation models. And as Bertrand reminded us, over the past 30 years, we could not have a binding agreement in the UN system that would create some kind of commitment. The closest thing to that is the Global Digital Compact, which is an agreement, but it's not binding agreement. There are many aspirations. So state of the art, the good news is that the pieces of the puzzle are there, but we still need to build the puzzle so that we have information integrity. Thank you so much.
Brasileiro britânico, hein, no horário.
Wow, what a British Brazilian, right on time. Amazing. Julia, you are a researcher at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. What are the main challenges for you to have access to information and data and information integrity, and considering the main obstacles? And how have you overcome these obstacles? Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Patricia. Before, I would like to thank you the invitation. I think that this event, congratulations for the 20th anniversary of Cetic.br. Thank you very much, Alexander, Fabio, the wonderful show yesterday.
Isso é dos principais problemas. A Fernanda do Internet Lab
Fernanda from the Internet Lab also raises this question. And yes, more and more, we are coming across this difficulty of access to data. But before access, because there was a period of slightly more than 1 year, and there was an academic MBI in Twitter. It was very powerful tool for us, even with the academic API of Twitter that provided us almost 90 fields of information about the data that we were downloading. So there was lots of information to help us. But the thing is that the data on the platforms, They are not produced for research. So I am new here. Last year was my first contact with Cetic. I was at the planning of the Information Integrity Survey, and I found it was phenomenal. I was really wondered with the care with which you develop the research methodology for each question. So the data, they are produced for research. They're as good at that. They have this quality. The data on the platforms do not. They are commercial data. They are for marketing, not for research. So they use data that we produce and they sell it. I'm not even talking about the tampering and misinformation with objectives of changing electoral processes. I'm just talking about the way they use our data, and monetization is to sell. For us to be able to do research, so we need to have some strategy. We can use shaving, and then they don't want us to have access to their data. And so, but we can do shaving, and we can have more qualitative research. The API is still open. We don't know how far it will be. So I can collect data from Telegram, and there are links and references to other platforms through which they circulate. So I can go after the information. But one thing that I worried in collecting data, what I look in the data. For example, I collect hashtag when it was possible to do in Twitter for climate change, let's say. And before going the details, I do a word cloud and some other exploratory analysis. But today, as users with these language models, many times to optimize the post, the content creator, for example. They go to ChatGPT, they go to the cloud. How can I build that subtitle to put on my Instagram picture so that it has a broader reach? What is a hashtag, the emoji? This makes information integrity in that ecosystem, and I'm not going to those that have the agenda of manipulating, and then just regular user. Because these platforms, they use AI to drive the content that will make us stay there longer, we generate more data, and they are going to monetize more the data that we generate. If regular common users now start adopting these resources and creating large language models through large language models, the contents that they're posting, we are in an ecosystem where information integrity is increasingly more difficult to be measured. Even a post without the intention of manipulating, many times we don't know. We don't know the origin. How can we define what is organic, genuine? So this is the main challenge to me. Beyond creating data sets, we can have strategies, we do shaving, research networks, but for us to interpret what we are collecting from the platforms, wow, this is way more difficult now. I can, for example, take a picture of my, I'm from Rio, in the Christ, and to ask to erase all other people who are there.
eu não estou com intenção nenhuma de manipular, eu
I
não quero
have
alterar
no
os resultados
intention
da
of
eleição, eu não
manipulating.
quero
I don't want to change the results
monetizar
of
o
an
meu
election
conteúdo,
or
nada disso. Eu só
monetize
quero
my content.
mostrar.
Nothing. I just
Só
want to
que
look
isso em
nice.
larga escala,
But at a
com grande
broad
volume,
scale and large
a
volumes,
interpretação da
the
informação que a gente está
interpretation of
extraindo,
information, the
tirar
data
uma
that we
informação
are
de
extracting
qualidade,
to
está
take
ficando
out
cada vez mais
good
complexo.
quality information is becoming increasingly more difficult.
Foi dito ontem pelo Mário Volpi e pelo Gianni
Yesterday,
a nossa vida é digital.
Mario Volpi
Né?
said,
Os jovens
our
hoje em dia, quando
lives
você fala
are
acessar
digital.
a internet, ninguém acessa mais a internet. A
We
gente
can't
acorda
access the
conectado e a gente
internet.
vai dormir
We
conectado.
wake up connected and we
E
go
nem
to
sempre
bed
é
to
uma
sleep
opção.
connected.
Então,
And sometimes it's
como é
not
que
even
a
an
gente,
option.
né, essa
So,
fabricação desse conteúdo e a gente está
the
vivendo
fabrication of contents
nesse
and how can
ecossistema
we live and
digital, né?
experience this
Separar
digital
o digital do não
ecosystem
digital está
it's
cada vez
difficult
mais
to separate
complexo.
digital from non-digital.
Então,
It's
isso eu acho
getting
que
more and
é
more
bastante
difficult to
preocupante.
do that. And
Né?
this is very concerning.
E aí,
And then,
para terminar com uma pergunta, né?
to end with a question,
que
because I
pegando
don't have the
uma fala da
answers.
Sônia Jorge ontem.
And what
Como é que a
Sonia
gente vai
Jorge
estudar?
said yesterday,
Como é que a
how
gente
can
vai
we
interpretar?
study
Como é que a gente vai
and
desenvolver
interpret
medidas para
and
tentar
develop
mitigar os
measures to
efeitos
try to
da
mitigate
desinformação
the
se a gente não
effects
consegue
of
medir?
misinformation
Como é que a gente
if we can't measure?
né?
How can we
Então,
do that?
eu não tenho a
So
resposta,
I do not have
mas
the answer,
acho que a gente está
but
numa
I think that we are
bastante
in
complexa
a
e eu
situation
acho que a
that is very
tendência é que
complex,
essa
and I think that the
complexidade
trend is
aumente.
for the complexity to
Obrigada,
increase.
Júlia.
Thank you. Thank you, Julia.
Bem interessante esse aspecto da
It's very
amostra
interesting, this thing
viciada, né? Ou amostra
of the
do
biased
próprio usuário.
sample
Bem,
that
para
users.
além de todos os outros problemas que
So
vocês
in
têm.
addition to all other problems that you may have.
Nina da Hora,
So
diretora
Nina da
executiva
Hora
e fundadora
is
do
CEO
Instituto
and
da Hora.
founder
Nina,
of the Da Hora
nossa,
Institute.
acho que é a única aqui no painel cientista da computação.
I think that you are the only computer scientist here in this
Quais são os
panel.
desafios
Which
técnicos,
are the
tá? E também éticos,
technical
que é uma coisa que você estuda
and
muito,
ethical challenges
mais urgentes dessa investigação dos impactos da
that are most
desinformação, né? Acho
pressing
que você também
to investigate the
disse, e
impacts
achei
of
interessante esse
misinformation,
ponto,
I
né, Carlos,
think
sobre o que a Júlia
deepfake?
falou, você que
And
também
do
tá
you have
nesse
anything to say
linha de
about what
frente aí da
Julia said
pesquisa.
that you were on the front line of
Obrigada
research?
pelo convite, pela
Thank you so
pergunta.
much for the
Parabéns pelos 20
invitation, for the
anos. Acho que só
question.
vocês para tirar da
Congratulations for the
internação
20th
da pesquisa
anniversary. I
para
think
para
that you're
o
the only one
evento.
to take me out from my
E aí eu vou
research
pegar um
to
gancho do
come
que a
out here
Júlia, a
and
gente
talk.
trabalha juntas, né,
So
em um dos
I and
projetos
Julia, we
aqui
work
de
together
combate à
in one
desinformação,
of our projects
justamente tentando entender como
of
que funciona, como que a interfere nessa
IBICT in terms
compreensão,
of fighting
né,
misinformation.
nesse afastamento
So
de
we
quando
are
a gente fala
trying
a
to
verdade, que é o que está
identify.
acontecendo. É o que ela está engajando com a sociedade. E, de um
So
outro ponto de vista,
the
que é
interaction with
tentar
society
pensar
from another
modelos que
standpoint to
possam
try and think
mitigar
models
e
that can
detectar, né,
mitigate
essas
and
anomalias.
detect
Então, o
these
exemplo que você
anomalies.
trouxe das
The
deepfakes,
example
Patrícia,
that
a
you
gente
mentioned
colaborou
of
online
deepfake,
por conta
Patricia, we
dessa
had an
questão do
online
passado, né,
collaboration
na
because
pandemia.
of things that happened in the
E
past
um dos
during the
desafios em relação
pandemic.
às
And one
deepfakes,
of the
tanto de imagem
challenges in
quanto
terms
de
of
áudio,
deepfake,
é
both in
justamente
terms of
você
image
conseguir
and
pensar um
audio,
modelo
is to try and
que vai
think of a
detectar
model
na mesma velocidade que ela
that
está
will
sendo
detect
desenvolvida.
as fast as
Então,
it
hoje, nós
is
temos
being
aplicativos
developed.
que eles vão
So we
sintetizar e
have
vão
apps
resumir,
that will
e eles são entregues
summarize
para a população e a população acha que é
and they're
brincadeira.
given to the
Né?
population. The
Então,
population think that
normalizou a
it's
partir
a
de um
joke.
aplicativo, que agora me fugiu o
So
nome, mas era um
there's an app
aplicativo que
that I
todo mundo
can't
estava usando
remember.
para
It's
ficar com o
an app
cabelo
that
branco,
everyone was using to
para
have
tentar prever
a different kind of hair,
como que seria a pessoa
to
idosa.
try and see
Eu
how
fiquei
they
em
would look
desespero, porque
when they're
todos os
old. I
meus
was
amigos usam
desperate
isso. Eu
because
não
all
tenho
my
a
friends
menor
use
pretensão de
this.
adiantar como é que eu vou ficar mais
I
velha,
have no
porque
intention
eu já tenho
of
cabelo
advancing
branco,
how
então
I'm
assim, eu já
going
estou
to look
vendo
when I grow old. Is also
já
because
estou
I
tendo
already
uma
have
prévia,
gray
então eu
hair,
não tive
so
tempo.
I already have
Mas eu
a
peguei para estudar o
preview.
aplicativo.
But
E esse
I got it to
aplicativo,
study
ele
this
foi
app,
desenvolvido
and this
parte
app was
Rússia
developed
e
partly
China,
in
e a
Russia
base de
and
dados
China,
dele era uma
and
base
their
de dados
database
de
was a
raspagem
database
de imagens da internet. Então,
of
na
image
base de
shaving
dados, na
from the
base de imagens
internet.
deles,
So in their
você não tinha
image
nome,
database,
endereço,
there were no names,
nenhuma
address,
classificação do rosto daquela
no
pessoa.
classification of the
Mas
faces
quando
of the
você
people.
pegava e jogava no Google, tentava fazer cruzamentos, aí
But
metodologias
when
para
you put
isso,
it in
você
Google,
conseguia
there are
encontrar a rede social da
methodologies.
pessoa e
You
conseguia
could find the
encontrar quem era a
person's
pessoa.
social network and
Então essa
see
pessoa nem
who that
sabe que ela
person
está
was.
fazendo parte
and the person doesn't even know that they are part of this image database that we are using. This is another challenge. So when you start training tools to detect these anomalies and threats, we need to have a database of text that represents reality. So unfortunately or fortunately, it's very good for me to have a database through which that I can use and develop the tool. On the other hand, there is an issue of privacy, personal data, so these people do not know that they are part of a database.
And then once we get close to the platform's challenges, in accordance to the discussion that we are talking here about platforms, and that is being supported by the 2338 regulation from about AI, data that we are inputting into the social media, that should be open data. We should have access to that because they are using behavioral information, our parents, family members, and daily activities. Once they close it, they increase that barrier. I mean, I won't be able to develop tools that will help me to identify those anomalies easier. Twitter and Microsoft, they have developed a bot they sent to a Twitter so they could learn with the users, and the bot was bringing back racist sentences with prejudice and hate speech. He was using terminologies and words which were very difficult to be identified in an automated mode. Anytime this example is addressed, I say, well, we do have a problem, but who to blame? Users in the platform, and then you extrapolate to the detection and the discussion of being too extreme, and that's not the core of this presentation, or that is related to the base of the presentation, where there is a logic. Data scratching helps us to perform a qualitative survey, but on the other hand, it raises a number of other problems because the data that we are using, we do not have access to that, and we might be supported by the ethical commission of an university because they understand we are not going to use that research for violence or any type of aggression, and we are always being supported by a consensus of the scientific community in relation to this type of logics and how we operate a survey. If we have time for questions, I would like to hear the public's opinions. We have platforms, big techs, but as a researcher, before being someone who will be participating at those debates in the front line, I need to understand if my survey work is already born under unethical premises or not, just because I have been supported by those other spheres or other standards. Because it's not just a consensus, but also a standard made by the scientific community. You have addressed ethical issues, ethical challenges, and as artificial intelligence may be fit as an emergent concept because we don't have consolidated tools. Artificial intelligence it is not consolidated. It is under constant development, and I may run the risk to state it, to affirm, and please don't post it. There is no more Twitter. So we do not see not even 20% of what can be done or what the possibilities are with AI. As that is an emergency technology, the process in order to identify challenges, they have been changing all the time, but a process which does not change even with evolutions and even with the debates, they are related to risks and to the diagnosis of violence and biases of populations who are already marginalized, racism, LGBT phobia, attacks to people with special needs. I mean, the whole structure which is already being built due to our social relationships, they are not changed. And in my opinion, these are the main challenges in AI. Thank you, Nina.
Now, Molly Lesher, thank you so much for being here. Or I could speak Portuguese. whichever. Okay. Well, the OECD Truth Quest survey was just published in February, if I'm not mistaken, in the beginning of the year, right? Last year. Okay, I thought it was this year. Okay, last year. It was recently published. If you could tell us, not sure if everybody read it, the main findings and what key lessons of the survey you think could be used when policymakers around the world are, devising policies.
So thanks very much for the question. Thanks very much for the opportunity to be here. It's a great pleasure to talk to you a little bit about the OECD Truth Quest survey. The survey was a gamified web-based survey where we tried to test people's ability to identify false and misleading content online. We had several different research questions in mind. One was testing for overall ability. One was testing whether the theme of the content influenced people's ability to determine its veracity. We looked at environmental false and misleading content, health-related content, and international affairs. And international affairs is really to see if content that was farther away from the person made a difference in terms of determining whether it was true or not. We also tested our taxonomy of false and misleading content online. We have a taxonomy of 5 different types that ranges from satire to propaganda to mis and disinformation. And we wanted to see if certain types were harder for people to tell the difference than others. We also looked at origins. So if human-generated content was easier or harder to identify than AI-generated content. And here I would stress that we did look at text. We didn't look at videos or images, partly because we cover 21 different countries, and so we needed to localize the survey itself. And then at the end, we had a really interesting experiment with AI-generated labels or watermarks. Now, all of the content that people saw, they were real-life false and misleading content or true content that had been fact-checked. So it wasn't us at the OECD determining if something was true or false. It was something that was actually out there in the wild, which is really, really important. We were testing things that people had questions about and that fact-checkers, professional fact-checkers, had actually bothered to look at. And we did it in this sort of generic social media setting because we know that people will give more accurate answers when they feel like they're looking at the content in the way that they normally do. And so what did we find? We found that people over these 21 countries identified the veracity of content 60% of the time. So if you turn that on its head, 40% of the time they couldn't tell. And that's just a little bit better than a coin toss. And I think that that really highlights for me the real importance of this issue for democratic societies. If people don't know what they're consuming is true or not that often, that is a huge, huge problem. And it's really hard to measure, and we've heard a little bit about that today. And one of the more usual ways of measuring is perception surveys. Have you seen fake news in the last 3 months? But what we did in our surveys, the very first question before anybody saw anything was how confident do you feel in your ability to identify false and misleading content online? It varied a bit across countries, but in every single country, and the ladies are gonna laugh, men were far more confident than women. But when you look at actual ability was completely uncorrelated with with their actual score. And so what that really highlights is not that perception surveys aren't important, but the real limitations they have in terms of us trying to assess circulation of content and whether or not it's gone up or down. Now, we did see some regional differences. The Nordic countries were far better at identifying veracity than the Latin American countries. And we're still sort of trying to unpack a little bit what that means. We didn't see, and I was really surprised by this a priori. I expected that health mis and disinformation would be harder for people to identify because it's personal, it's emotional. It wasn't the case. Theme really didn't play much of a role. We did see that type, that taxonomy I mentioned, did have some kind of impact, with misinformation and contextual deception being harder to identify than some of the other types. And interestingly, and this goes against sort of the conventional wisdom, people had a much easier time identifying disinformation generated by AI, and we used GPT-4, than they did human generated content. And this, does a little bit go against the conventional wisdom, and it's not to say that AI doesn't have a magnifying potential for this content. There's not a lot to worry about it, but it just, for us in this survey, we found that it was still humans that were telling the more difficult stories. Interestingly, we also asked people about their perceptions about AI. Did they think that AI was going to have a positive impact on their life? We saw in Latin America, in the US and Japan, people were much more optimistic about AI's potential than they are in Europe, where there's a lot more pessimism, I think a lot more scaredness about AI. And we saw that this had an impact on their ability to identify if what they were seeing was true or not. We put a label on the very last claim that all respondents saw, so that we didn't bias the rest of the survey. It was on a true claim, and we asked people if it was true or false. And the people that had the positive perception about AI got it right far more often than the people that didn't. Now, their TruthQuest scores, their overall ability was the same. So that really shows you that it was the presence of this label that was driving people to think whether this content was true or not. And that sort of reaffirms what I hear when I talk to a lot of European colleagues. Whenever you talk about AI generated content, they almost immediately think it's false. And that's not the case. And we need to, as public policy makers, really think carefully about labeling initiatives. And this is a big conversation people are having. Should we watermark? Should we label? The last thing I wanted to mention in my last minute here is we looked at, we had a headline. We had a generic photo, and then you could click to read more context about the headline. And we tried to assess whether when people clicked, if that helped them get the answer right more often than not. And this is important because it's often indicated in media literacy initiatives that you need to read more about a headline to try to tell if it's true. And worryingly, what we found, especially for some types of content in that taxonomy, was that reading more actually didn't help people. And it didn't help people for content where we expected it would, like the contextual deception I mentioned. And I think this is a really worrying thing for all of us policymakers here, is trying to design these media literacy programs, initiatives, programs, et cetera. How do we do that in a good way that's actually going to help people? And we didn't test whether going to third-party websites would help, and we would like to do that in another iteration. But even seeing that in the same browser, in the same content, that it didn't help is something that's really worrying us, and something that we're going to be looking at in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Molly. Bom, João Brandt, que é o secretário de Políticas Digitais
João
da
Brandt,
Secom.
who is Second Digital Policy Manager. In your perspective, after so many years working with information integrity, what are the principles which represent a priority to policies to guarantee information integrity? Hi there, good morning. Thanks for the invitation. I would like to greet Cetic for its 20 years on the behalf of Alexandre Barbosa, Harmut Glaser, Cetic, NIC, and CGI are institutions which should be kept, strength, and where we should be able to celebrate not only 20 years, but 30, 40 years. It's a great honor to have several colleagues here from the government sector. We have Eugenio, Daniel, I don't know who else is being here today representing the government branch. Julia, Nini, Nina, Molly, great honor and pleasure to be with you. I will answer your question gradually with 5 statements. First statement, which I'd like to highlight, the nervous center system of the issue is the business model. Julia has already addressed that, but the logics, the reasoning of producing engagement as a strong metric and almost the only one available for the development of digital platforms, this is some a way to disorganize values which had organized the informational ecosystem since 1945 to 2010. The reasoning that professional journalism was the center of the public sphere had some issues such as pluralism, diversity, but confidentiality and reliability, they were side conversations and they were based on strong normative values which are fully abandoned, and examples given by Julia as how that is stimulated regardless of the desire or not of the manipulation. So we have a problem, a huge one, and that is related to the way as platforms work. Statement number 2, the past 2 years consolidated internationally information integrity as being a strong reference value, and that's not little, it's quite a lot, believe me. We have some examples which shows that February 23, I visited UNESCO about the digital platform regulatory principles discussions. Those aspects were already in the discussion in the plus 30, but that information integration topic, it becomes more strong after the UN states their global principles for information integrity than in the digital global agreement. Also in the recommendations documents by OECD, by the 38 members of OECD plus Brazil, and also in the G20 in our government as one of the 4 main priorities. And Daniel was also in charge of this work in the group of digital economy, and that was one of the 4 priorities, and we have reached a very high level consensus. And Brazil, together with the UNESCO and UN, has released a global initiative for climate change activities, where the goal is to be more concrete to get the disinformation topic and connect to a strong topic with the SDG 13 for the climate changes and how to mitigate those changes, and all the materiality of all those commands placed by CTI. Brazil has a very strong participation in all those components, ourselves, Itamaraty, the international consultancy, and that is an ability that we, Brazil, had thanks to a connection towards those different international agencies. Statement number 3, AI may affect information integrity significantly. I may or can, because we may always, count on the benefit of doubt, but I may say that it will affect it. First, and I will take the generative AI as my starting point. The reasoning of the sources which you select to your model. That is a key. If you scratch the whole internet and then you give the same weight to what was published in any site and one which is more trust, you might believe that most of the clicks will be in the click hunter type of website and not in an official website. So input dimension is very important, as well as output dimension, which is the ability that AI gives you to manipulate images, sounds, to improve manipulation with some financial or political interests, and what is non-intentional. If you plant something bad, you are gonna, harvest also a bad product. But there is another dimension, which is the sustainability one, and this is a very worrisome dimension. The whole sustainability reasoning behind the journalism is related to direct traffic or to journalism, and generative AI will affect both. And if we do not acknowledge that generative AI generates a giant sustainability issue to the creation of intangible goods and services, journalism, artistic sector, and science. Although I fully agree to what Bertrand de la Chapelle said about the need to discuss about the availability of scientific knowledge, let alone why he made an exception without damaging the whole compensatory image, and how will that benefit the real players, the real actors, and not the intermediate, if I got your words right, Bertrand. At some extent, how will that be affected is key. And now from a regulatory aspect, which is my fourth statement, platforms and AI regulatory framework may mitigate those negative effects throughout prevention and precaution by digital platforms and by developers and AI system developers, or by obligations such as copyright admission. This is very polemic. This week, we had a case in the US that led to the sack of the officer by Trump because of that topic. But we are in disagreement that the whole content would be seen as fair use according to the American content. In Brazil, that does not exist, so it's illegal. And last but not least important, there is a set of public policies that may collaborate to the protection of information integrity. And this is the question. So I'll get some examples. Mediatic literacy, which is one of the pillars mentioned by Canela. Brazil, due to SECOMS, together with the Education Ministry, they are on the advanced implementation of a mediatic literacy for high school and elementary school. And that means didactic material preparation, professors and teachers training to have that available in the digital program, and also operational guidelines more recently, which were built up together with the Center of Homologation, which obliges that the system is transversally available at the curriculums as of 2026, and that represents a significant development. Then there is another issue, which is development of surveys based on disinformation and the production of solutions for the matter. We have a set of agencies working together in this agenda. They are all Brazilian agencies, That's why I did not mention their names. And there are some announcements to be made very soon, probably in the Brazilian Internet Forum, which is an incubator that will strengthen native journalism, which is a relevant part of this discussion. And last, protection to rights, the use of screens for children and adolescents, which guide family members, educators, teachers, social assistants. There are several other examples, but as I don't have time and related to the discussion of the 20 years of the Cetic and what is foreseen in the AI Brazilian plan, it is algorithmic center of transparency. This is an action that is based on a CTI involvement together with the Cetic and Nic.br. And if we are able to materialize this transparency in algorithms, it will help us to find the joint questions to most of the problems that were addressed here by the other panelists here present today. Thank you, João.
Só lembrando, você falou da importância das fontes, né? Que fontes vão ser usadas ali nas respostas.
You mentioned the importance of sources in generative AI. We had a recent case of Google about glue and the pizza. Is that what you said? What can I do not to have the cheese sliding down from the pizza slice? And then the answer was, you may use a non-toxic glue. So the source is very important. Who is gonna use some glue not to have the cheese slicing from the pizza slice? Well, I will ask a question to Guilherme.
E também falando em causa própria, o que vocês têm
What do you,
e a ameaça
as to AI and the threats presented by AI, and how can journalism be sustained, which was already suffering due to a number of other reasons, the high concentration of advertisements? What is the harm of no longer having directed traffic by AI and not be compensated the whole journalistic materials to feed those models? What is UNESCO doing in that sense for that purpose? For many years, before the situation becoming more complex with the chat box and generative AI, much was being said about the viability of the media and what are the elements which should be present from a public policy perspective to deal with all of that. And the main challenge, I would say, is that there is a certain consensus achieved that journalism as an institution, that is an institution for a democratic consolidation, for the existence of democracies. If you say that AI is going to make the judiciary power to disappear, if you do not invest, I guess that there will be a consensus that something must be done. It's difficult to build up a democracy model, at least that one that was created until the Human Rights Declarations, without having a judiciary power that will guarantee rights, etc., etc. I guess there is a certain consensus that people, if someone says journalism will disappear, people will say that will be a democratic problem. But the question, which does not reach any consensus, if that's so, payers, they have to fund the existence of journalism. Let's be honest, if there is a financial problem, someone has to close or has to pay that bill. And how can we pay for that bill? And that's exactly when I believe that there is more and more consensus that that should be the answer. But there is a central problem, which is how to do that and still keep your independence. Because if the money is financed by the public and throughout the governmental agencies, how can we guarantee that the government will be fair enough and it will distribute it blindly? And no one has an answer yet to that question. The main problem regarding public goods, that's why we're saying that information is a public good, journalism is another public good, and Arkeloff said in his text, which is marketing for lemons, and public goods such as education, health, etc., and UNESCO would say journalism, they cannot be funded just by the private sector. But in the case of journalism, even though that applies, how can we find an equation to find editorial independence? We have no answers to that question. That's why we have dedicated the Global Day of Free Press. It's exactly that. How may we solve that from a copyright perspective throughout a regulatory framework? But there is not one single answer. If the idea is to have a hyper concentration of the public spheres throughout the chats, the privatization of the public sphere, no, not even Habermas have thought about. I don't know what to say. I'm sorry. So we trust UNESCO.
Obrigada, Guilherme.
Molly, now.
I was wondering, considering future editions of the Truth Quest survey, what are the topics or main aspects that you think could be improved and should be changed?
So thanks for answering that. I'm going to a little bit pick up on what Guillermo just said, because we haven't released all of the data that we collected through the first iteration of the Truth Quest survey. And some of the data we have is related to people's perceptions about democracy and whether or not they think that independent journalism is important for democratic societies. And while I wholeheartedly agree it's critical and massively important, what we're seeing in the data is that a non-trivial share of these countries don't think that's the case, especially the young people. And for me, that's extremely worrying, because the young people are the future, right? And if they don't think that independent journalism is important, where does that leave us? And we have a huge amount of work to do to try to convince these young people that it is important. Other things we saw, and this data is published in the survey, is on media consumption patterns. And you still see that news outlets and apps is the most sourced place for news, for information, but social media is second. And social media is most often used by young people. And we see that people that most often get their news from social media have lower Truth Quest scores. So all of this stuff for me is extremely worrying. And we will be producing a paper that comes out later this year. The first draft will be later this year, where we look at that, and we also look at how political affiliation impacts people's ability to identify false and misleading content online. Looking ahead to sort of a Truth Quest 2, we'd like to get into images, potentially videos. I was talking to Fabio a couple weeks ago, and he's so lucky. They're going to be running a similar survey here in Brazil, and they can do all those exciting things that we couldn't do because we had to localize in so many languages. But we are going to be looking into that, and also to looking a little bit more into AI generation and whether we see any more differences. Thank you.
Thank you, Molly. João, queria que você falasse pouquinho.
João, could you please tell me a little bit what we expect in terms of results in the mid and short term for information integrity? And these other initiatives in multilateral agencies that if you could mention them, so of information integrity and So, how is it going?
Quem acompanha o debate internacional
Well,
sabe que as
if you
peças se
are
movem
seeing the
igual as
international
placas
debate,
tectônicas.
you
Elas
know
são
that
assim,
pieces
elas
move
saem
like
voando de um lado
tectonic
para o outro.
plates.
Às
Things
vezes
are,
tem os terremotos, né?
sometimes there
Mas
are
eu diria que, no geral, são
earthquakes,
movimentações
but
lentas.
overall there is
Acho que o
slow
exemplo que foi dado no painel
movement.
anterior
I
também
think that the
sobre a questão do
example of the
IGF
previous about IGF
mostra que, por um lado, nós temos um
shows
espaço
that
que se
we
capilariza, e,
have
por outro, você não
a
tem
space that
espaço
has
hoje
capillarized,
que
but there
estabeleça
is
compromissos fortes
no
sobre
space that
o
defines
envolvimento.
strong
Isso é uma questão. Eu
commitments
acho que, em primeiro lugar,
about the
o
digital.
resultado do Pacto Digital Global é muito
The
importante para
result of the
o pacto,
Global
ainda que
Digital
não
Pact,
seja uma
even
convenção,
though it's not
ele
a
estabelece
convention,
conjunto de
it
compromissos
defines a
em
set
várias
of
áreas, segurança de
agreements
dados,
in
inclusão
many areas of
digital,
data
questão da
governance,
conectividade
digital
significativa,
inclusion
de
with
integridade da
meaningful
informação e de
connectivity,
inteligência
information
artificial,
integrity, and
que puxam
artificial
por um nível de
intelligence
ação
that
comprometem os estados, mas a partir de um pacto
involve
democrático. Isso é
action.
importante também, porque a gente sabe
It's a
que os estados podem ser
democratic.
os maiores promotores ou podem ser
So they are the
algozes.
main
Então, assim, a gente
promoters.
precisa. Eu
So
acho que
I
a
think
implementação do
that
GDC, e, portanto,
the
também
implementation
olhar atento
of
sobre o escritório
GDC,
que
the
foi
Global Digital
montado para a
Compact, and the
agenda
story
digital
that was
na
built
ONU
for
Nova
the
York,
digital
na
agenda
ONUDIP, é muito
in the
importante. O
UN,
Brasil deve
New York is
contribuir
very
para que essa
important,
agenda
and
ganhe
Brazil is
força.
supposed to contribute
E também
for
isso,
this
obviamente,
agenda
dialoga com o processo da
to
WISC mais 20,
gain
que aí
strength.
é
And
todo um
this is
capítulo de
related
como
to
fazer com
ACES
que
plus 20, which
a
is
agenda do
another whole
IGF, do
chapter to make
multissetorialismo, ganhe
IGF and
efetividade e
multi-sector
impacto. Eu acho que
to
isso está
become
nos
effective
termos do
and
Net
gain
Mundial
impact. And this is
mais
related
10, que foi também
to
citado
the
pelo
Global Net
Eugênio
plus
aí
10 that
na questão anterior. A
Eugenio
iniciativa
mentioned
em
in the
si, ela
previous question.
cumpre
Well, the
para nós
initiative in itself,
alguns
to
papéis.
us,
Primeiro, ela
has a
busca
few things.
experimentar uma ação
First,
de
it
estados e
tries
de
to
organismos
experiment
multilaterais que busque resultados práticos. Isso não é
multi-stakeholders
trivial,
seeking
quer dizer, você sair
practical results.
dos
This is
acordos de
not
palavras
trivial.
e dizer
So
o
just
seguinte,
having agreements
vamos
of words and
reunir e
saying,
produzir
let's
evidências sobre o
gather and
impacto da
produce
desinformação na mudança do
evidence
clima.
about the impact
Nós
of
colocamos um
misinformation on
parágrafo lá no
climate
GDC
change.
dizendo que isso é uma
There was
missão de todo mundo, produzir
a
e
paragraph in
produzir
the
evidências sobre o impacto da
GDC saying that this is
desinformação
everybody's
nos SDGs, né, nos
responsibility
ODS. Nós estamos
for the
cumprindo um pouco a
SDGs.
nossa parte, junto com
So we
França,
are
Reino
playing
Unido,
our role. We're
Suécia,
doing what you're
Dinamarca
supposed
e
to do,
Marrocos e
along with
Chile,
France,
que
UK,
são os países que
Sweden,
aderiram.
Denmark, and
Então,
Chile. These are the countries that
nesse
signed it.
sentido, está sendo constituído um fundo
So
junto da Unesco. O
we
Brasil vai
are
doar
constituting
milhão
a
de
fund
dólares em
in the
2025,
UNESCO.
26
Brazil is
juntos,
going to donate $1 million
para
in 25,
e
26
aí tem
together
uma
to
expectativa de
support.
captação,
And then there is an
obviamente, com outros
expectation of
atores
raising from other
públicos e privados, para
stakeholders,
fortalecer essa
private,
agenda de pesquisa.
to
Segundo,
strengthen this
fortalecer a agenda de
research agenda.
estratégias de
Number
comunicação
two,
também.
to
A
strengthen
gente vê a questão das
shared
das
communication
emergências climáticas
strategies.
produzindo
We see
efeitos
that
muito
climate
parecidos,
emergency
inclusive, de
producing very
desinformação
similar
na
effects in
Nigéria,
terms
na
of
Índia, na
misinformation.
Califórnia, na Espanha, no Brasil,
Nigeria, India, California,
essa
Spain,
estratégia
Brazil.
que estamos juntos.
So
Depois,
how can
aumentar a
we have
produção de
strategies?
jornalismo
Number
investigativo
two,
sobre esse tema.
to
Então, acho que
foster
esses três pilares são
investigative
importantes dentro
journalism.
da construção
These
do
three
fundo.
pillars are
Outra
important.
frente, pautar
Another
o tema na
front
COP30.
is
E,
to
portanto, no
include
processo
this theme in the
nacional
agenda of
30,
COP30,
31 e 32.
not just
Temos nunca
30,
ganhado força
32,
e eu
once
acho que dessa
32.
vez o Brasil
This
vai
theme
priorizar
has never gained
esse
strength, and
tema
this
como uma
the
das
year Brazil
questões
is going to prioritize
relevantes
this
do
theme as
Brasil.
one of
Obviamente,
the
tem
relevant
várias
issues,
outras, mas
Brazil and
ele
many others.
significa que ganha
And this means
uma
that it
entrada na
will
COP30, mas
gain,
também no processo
it will go into
COP. E,
COP30
finalmente,
agenda.
testar ações
And
conjuntas entre
finally,
os países.
test
Então, a
joint
França nos
actions
propôs,
between
vamos
countries.
criar um
France
sistema de
has
alerta
proposed,
rápido
shall we
sobre
create a
esse tema?
quick
Então, vamos lá, a
alert
MMA
system? Well,
investiu
MMA
recursos
has
no Ministério do Meio
invested,
Ambiente num
the
sistema de
Ministry of the
informações
Environment,
ambientais muito relevante, que
in
contribuiu para isso.
a
Estamos
system
discutindo
for
nesse momento
environmental
concretamente com a França
information that is
como
very
dar isso. E
relevant.
isso e
Now we
convidar
are
outros países.
concretely
Então, é um
discussing with
exemplo,
France how to
eu acho que de
start that
buscar
with other
que as
countries. So these are
palavras dos
examples
documentos
to
internacionais
try
sejam
and
não
make
só
that the wording in
inspiradores e
international
deslocadores de
documents
placas
are not
tectônicas, mas que
just
mudem também a direção do vento
inspiring,
das
but they
nuvens e
should
correntes
change
marítimas, coisas
not
mais,
just
digamos assim,
tectonic
próximas
plates,
da
but
Terra
also
do que as
the
placas
winds
tectônicas.
and sea
Obrigada, João.
currents.
Nina, como que os modelos de
Nina,
IA como é que a gente pode
How
usar
can
isso
AI
para
models
detectar e combater conteúdos enganosos, desinformação,
to fight
e tem um
misinformation,
perigo da gente se tornar muito
deepfake? Can
dependente
we become too
dessas
dependent
tecnologias para
of
assegurar
these
a integridade da
technologies
informação?
to assure information
Eu vou começar
integrity?
respondendo que
I'm going to
para fazer
start
essa detecção,
answering
os modelos
that
eles
to
estão sendo
think about
treinados com
this,
dados
the models
sintetizados,
are being
né? São dados que não existem, Só que para
So
criar
these
esses
are
dados,
non-existing
você acha
data,
que você
but
precisa de
they
dados
don't
reais.
exist. But
Então, é só para
to
desmitificar,
create it, you need
porque
real data.
há um
Well,
mês
it's just
atrás,
to
alguém me perguntou
demystify,
assim,
because like 1
é
month ago,
verdade ou
someone
não?
asked,
Os
is
dados
it
que você tem que
true
usar?
or
Não,
not?
sim. Para você
Well,
criar um
yes,
dado que não
to
é real, você
create data that is
precisa
not
de
real,
dados
you
reais, porque
still
ele precisa
need
entender
real
o
life
padrão.
data because it
E aí
needs
eu
to
volto nessa
follow a
discussão,
pattern.
né? Sobre essa questão dos modelos, eles operam
About the
dentro de uma
models,
lógica
they
de
operate within
aprendizagem
a
de máquina
logic
proprietária,
of
né? Então, o que
proprietary
isso quer dizer? Que a
machine
gente já vê que as
learning.
plataformas, as empresas de IAs, as
So
startups
AI
de IAs, é preciso
startups,
trazer as startups para
you need
para
to
essa
bring
discussão,
startups
porque a maior
to
parte das
this
ferramentas que nós estamos
discussion
utilizando são de startups, ou
because
seja,
we're
empresas
using
não consolidadas
startups.
que
They are
estão no processo.
non-consolidated
Então, se em algum
companies that
momento
are
eles
in the
tirarem tudo
process.
do ar,
So if at
qualquer
some point in
pesquisa
time they take
focada
everything
nisso
offline, any
sai,
research
para
focusing
de
on
existir,
that
para de fazer
will stop,
sentido, né?
will no
Então,
longer make
eu
sense.
traria esse debate
So I
para
would
essa
bring the
questão,
debate
para a
to this
resposta,
issue to
porque esses
answer
modelos dependem desses
because
treinamentos.
these models
Esse
depend
treinamento depende do
on this
aprendizado dos
training.
padrões. Então,
It
quando você traz
depends
essa
on
inteligência da
standards.
informação, deixa eu tentar
So
pegar
if
um
there's
exemplo,
information, let me
esse
try
próprio
and
exemplo
get an example,
da
the
Google,
example
né?
of Google,
Não só
for
pela raspagem
example.
de dados, que provavelmente
It's
deve ter
not
vindo
just because
do
of data
Reddit,
shaving
mas para eles
from
entenderem
Reddit,
como que as
but also
frases,
for them
como
to
que como
understand
que é a composição de uma
how
frase
you make up
argumentativa,
a
uma frase
sentence,
no formato de pergunta,
argumentative,
para
a
você entender a estrutura de um
question, for
parágrafo,
you
para
to
você fazer
understand the
essa
structure of a
busca,
paragraph, for
você
you to
precisa entender
go
que
after
padrão
that,
é
you
esse.
need to understand
A forma que
what
esses
is
modelos estão
that
sendo
pattern.
treinados,
The
né,
way the
eles
models
operam
are
numa lógica
being
proprietária,
trained,
porque o que eu vou coletar de informação
the
precisa
information I am
mencionar algum
going
tipo
to
de lucro,
collect
porque senão eu
need
não
to
vou
provide
colocar essa informação na
profit.
base de dados. Tá?
Otherwise,
Então,
I'm not going to include this
para
on a
início de
database.
conversa,
So, to start,
infelizmente, as soluções que nós
unfortunately,
temos hoje,
the
elas
solutions
precisam
that
operar
we
nessa
have
lógica
today
para conseguir
needs to
detectar.
operate within
E aí,
that
por acaso,
logic
lá na
to be
Unicamp, no
able.
laboratório que eu faço parte, eu tenho
And in the
colegas,
lab that I
ele é
am
orientado,
part, I
foi
have
porque agora ele já voltou,
colleagues,
foi orientado
and we have
pelo
adopted
professor
now.
Alexandre Rezende,
This is
Alexandre
with
Rosa Rezende,
Professor
que é um
Alexandre
projeto só sobre
Rezende.
detecção de
It's just
deepfakes, né? E se
about
vocês entrarem no
detection of
laboratório do
deepfake.
Recode
And if
AI,
you go
você vai
into
ver uma
the
página do
lab, you're
site,
going
que é
to
uma
see a
página com
page on the
todos
website
os projetos
with
abertos
all the
de como que você
projects
pode
that are
explorar
going
essa
on
detecção,
in terms of how you
né?
can
E
explore
um
detection.
dos projetos é
And
para
one
você
of
tentar
the projects
detectar
is for you to try and
anomalias
detect
em artigos
anomalies
científicos.
in
E se eu não me
scientific
engano, ele
papers.
focou em
And if
biomedicina.
I'm not
Então, não sei quem
mistaken,
está
he's focusing on
acompanhando, mas a
biomedicine.
biomedicina está
I don't
passando
know
por um
who is
processo extremamente
following,
rigoroso
but
de ter
biomedicine is going
que
through a very strict process
resgatar
of having
e,
to
e, e
rescue
avaliar novamente os autores e suas respectivas
and
pesquisas,
review again
porque
the
foram
authors and their
encontrados dados
research
irreais,
because they found
tanto em formato de
unreal data,
áudio, de
both in
fotos,
audio,
textos. Então, assim,
photos,
foram dados
texts.
inventados
So they
e
were
que quando
made
foram
up
testar a
data because
metodologia,
when they
visualizaram,
tested the
pegaram no pulo. Então,
methodology,
tem a
they could
pesquisa
see that.
do colega, o Felipe, ele
So
acabou de se tornar
Philip
doutor, e a pesquisa
has
dele
just
foca,
finished his
né, em conteúdo
PhD,
científico, análise de diversos
focuses on
científicos. Então,
scientific and
toda
scientific
essa lógica que nós
papers.
estamos trabalhando,
So the
elas
whole
operam a
logic
partir dessa, infelizmente, da lógica que foi nos
is
apresentada.
related to the logic
Qual é
that
o
was
esforço
presented to
que está
us.
sendo feito por iniciativas que tentam
So everything related to initiatives
equilibrar
that
a
try
quantidade de
and
pessoas
balance the number
pesquisadoras
of
e que têm uma visão
people,
mais acadêmica,
researchers that have a more
com pessoas
academic
que trabalham
vision
com
and
pesquisa, mas
people
operam
that work
dentro do
with
contexto,
research but
fora do
operating
contexto acadêmico, né?
outside the
Então,
academic
institutos de pesquisa, as
context.
organizações sociais. O que
So
nós estamos
social
tentando fazer é
organizations,
repensar essa lógica
we
que
are
nós aprendemos
rethinking this
como
logic
o machine learning, a aprendizagem de máquina
in terms
funciona.
of machine learning.
Para fazer isso, você precisa abrir o código e
In
abrir
order
as
to do
ferramentas.
that, you need to open the
Então, o que
code.
tem acontecido é um
So what has
esforço,
been
né,
going
de
on has been
comunidade,
an
tem a comunidade
effort of
Python envolvida,
communities
o DAI
and
Institute, que
the community that is the
instituto
most
que foi fundado pela
involved
Timothy Gebro, que teve
is a
uma
study
das
by
pessoas que
Timothy
defendeu lá no
Gabriel and
início,
one of the
quando
persons
ela
defending
era,
it right
quando
in the
ela era
beginning
liderança da Google, né? E a
when it
forma que ela foi
was the Google
expulsa da Google
leadership
para apontar
and the
questões
Google
em relação
discourse to
a
talk
racismo
about
ambiental
this
e questões, né, desafios climáticos ali sendo gerados.
and to
O
deal
DAI
with
Institute
climate
também entra
challenges challenges within this perspective, offering open tools that we need to be able to, for example, one of the projects. So you use the image detection algorithms from satellite images. You get satellite images. They had an agreement with the government of South Africa. And then you get the satellite images that are organizing cities. You zoom in, and then I'm not going to explain the algorithm. It's not just zooming in with your mouse, and then you zoom in to understand the streets and the patterns and how houses are arranged in the space and which services are close to those houses in those neighborhoods. And what was the first conclusion of the research? The houses that are away from public services or away from commerce were historically affected by apartheid and are still affected by apartheid. So the objective is not to detect an anomaly or something that has been manipulated. And I was worried about, well, this is deep fake, is manipulated, tempered image, but you can do that. It's for political reasons. It's not that an example related to that, but it restores the reliability, not just of the population, but especially in research. And this is what I would like to defend. It's part of Cetic's and Cetic.br history to work in a very multi-stakeholder way, but always aiming to do research that will serve as the basis and that will have reliability when you share data and results. It's not sharing for marketing reasons. It's to really make that part of the educational process. So I would start answering in this way, because I think that there is a challenge of those who are too technical translate what the algorithms are and what they represent today, because they may change. And I'm not even talking about generative AI, because it has already changed a few logics of the concept internally, and I wouldn't have the time to explain this here. But this is a way for us to try and predict possible future problems. Julia, I have a question to you along the lines of what Nina was telling us. In your research, what is the impact of the use of AI that you see? Not impact on the sample, but on your tools. How can AI help? Well, Patricia, AI helps a lot, of course, with several models that we use those patterns. So we train the algorithm. For example, what Cambridge Analytics did was to use a model that was trained, a set of 50,000 people, ask those people to answer. So everyone knows about the scandal. And then, based on all the data that they had on Facebook, it could extrapolate and use machine learning like 50 million people would behave. And then you can define the right content to give to people so that you can change the behavior. So we also use that. We can to interpret the large data sets. So it's fundamental to use AI, always going back to qualitative. And I also think this zigzag of research. It's not just, let's check a sample, for example. And that's research. I think that this is fundamental for us to be able to make sure that it is faithful, true, and that things are being done in the right way. If we feed a set of artificial data that were generated with some kind of problem, the answer that is going to come out from the algorithm, which is a black box, is unpredictable. And when we use these data to create public policies to define fundamental issues we are going to invest. And this is very complicated. Yes, we are going to use AI, but always combined to qualitative, to ethics. This is fundamental. Now, organizer said that we have time for 2 questions from the audience. If you want to ask a question, you may raise your hand, say who you are.
Olá, primeiro eu quero agradecer o Cetic de
Hello.
novo por ontem.
First of all, I would like to thank you very much, the speakers from yesterday and today too. I'm learning a lot. And the question is this: thinking the current world that we are living in today, do you truly believe it is possible to fight misinformation? Really, truly. Because one thing is what we discuss, what we would like, and the other thing is the world we live in with 8 very big companies that bill $8 billion that would need to change their business model so that this could be somehow done. Do you believe this is possible, really, truly? Thank you.
Pergunta fácil.
Well, easy question.
Eu posso fazer só
Can I just,
acho que a gente
well,
tem que primeiro pegar na sua pergunta
well, number one,
o que é o combater?
we need to get the fighting in your question. Yeah, mitigating effects, yes.
A desinformação ela existe muito
Because
antes
misinformation has existed way before the internet
a
and social
intenção
media.
de
So
manipulação,
the
a gente vai
intention of manipulation,
combater isso.
we can't fight
Aí a gente
that.
pode falar sobre
We can talk about
do
the
espalhamento, a
effects of the
velocidade, o alcance que a
spreading,
desinformação
the
ganha quando
reach
entra na
and
internet e
speed
redes sociais.
one
Agora,
with the
a
internet and social
intenção de
network.
manipulação, eu
But the
diria que não, a
intention
gente
to
não vai conseguir
manipulate, to
combater nunca.
tamper, well, we'll never be able
Eu
to fight that. That will
acrescentaria que
never
eu
end.
buscaria combater por disputa. Porque
And I
essa
would
disputa acontecia
take
sem
out the
inteligência
word
artificial.
combat or fight,
Então, assim,
dispute.
se não acontecesse essa
So
disputa, a gente nem
if
teria
there's no
painel,
dispute,
um
we
evento
wouldn't
como
even
esse,
have a
porque aí
panel or an event
deixaria
such
pro
as
outro
this.
lado ganhando,
Because
sabe?
then,
Então,
well, they win and win, and that's it.
Deixa eu acrescentar uma coisa também que eu acho
Let me
importante.
add something which I find
Eu lembro
important.
da
I
Frances
remember
Haugen, que foi aquela
Frances
whistleblower
Haugen,
que saiu
the
do
whistleblower
Facebook, depois Meta.
that left the
E ela
Facebook,
diz algo que eu acho
and
relevante.
she
Ela fala
says
o seguinte:
something.
parece às vezes que a gente
Sometimes it
precisa
feels
fazer
like
uma
we need
revolução para mexer no
to
modelo
have
de
a
negócios. E aí
revolution
não é
to
isso.
change
Com
things
determinadas regras,
with
tweaks
just a
nos
few
sistemas, e a
rules and
imposição de
tweaks in the
alguns
systems
princípios que
and a few
preservem o
principles
interesse
that will
público, já dá
preserve
para
the public
diminuir
interest,
bastante
we can
a- o-
reduce considerably
o espalhamento de conteúdo
the
ilegal e
spreading
danoso. O
of
que isso significa?
illegal
As empresas não
and
precisam deixar de ganhar dinheiro. Elas
contents.
talvez ganhem, em vez
It's
de
not that the companies will
centenas
no
de
longer make
bilhões,
any
elas
money,
vão
instead of
ganhar
making
algumas
hundreds of
dezenas de
billions,
bilhões, mas assim, os
so
acionistas
many
ficarão felizes. Porque
dozens
sempre eu acho que o que a
of
gente está
billions.
dizendo é conjunto
Shareholders
de
will be
medidas
happy.
que pode.
It's a set
Elas
of
não
measures
são revolucionárias, mas
that
elas
will
impactam de
not
forma
be
significativa
revolutionary, but
o
will have a
resultado que a gente
significant
hoje
impact on
vive
the
com
results and the things that we are experiencing today.
Eu acho que só acrescentando ao que já foi dito, eu já acho que é
Just
grande
adding what
avanço
has
a
been
gente
said,
ter
I
dado
think it's a
salto nos
major
últimos
advance
anos.
that we took the leap
Quando essa
in
conversa
recent
começou
years.
há uns anos,
When this conversation started a few years ago, we used to say to fight fake
Se vocês
news.
fazem uma busca histórica
If
num
you
dos
do a
buscadores, vocês vão
historical
ver o quanto o
search
tema
in one
fake
of the
news em
search engines,
2016 era
so
prevalente,
as
e
fake
ele
news was prevalent in
decresce, a gente passa a
2016,
discutir
it
essa
goes
ideia de
down and down, and
desinformação,
then
em
now we are
inglês,
talking
com
about
nuances. Misinformation
misinformation
é
with
diferente de
nuances.
disinformation,
So
etc. Eu acho que já
misinformation
foi
and
ganho
disinformation are
conceitual, porque
different. I
não
think
são
there has
exatamente as
been
mesmas
a
coisas.
gain in
E
terms
agora
of
a gente passou a
concept.
discutir a
And
integridade da
now we are
informação, que eu
talking
acho que é
about
muito
information
interessante, porque
integrity,
é dar o
which is
salto,
very
fazendo uma
interesting.
analogia aqui, de
It's
discutir
make an
violência para
analogy.
discutir segurança pública.
It's a
E isso
leap
é
in terms of
importante, já é
discussing
ganho
violence to
enorme
discuss a
qualitativo.
public
O que se
security.
está tentando
So it's a
aqui não é apenas
qualitative
combater a
gain. It's not
desinformação, a
just to
circulação
fight
daquela coisa
misinformation and
pelo
circulation of
né,
something
pelo aplicativo, etc.
in
O
the
que está
app
se
or something.
tentando construir
What we
aqui
are
é
trying to do and build
arcabouço
here
para
is a
fazer com que a esfera
framework
pública
to
possa
make the
resolver os
public
dissensos
sphere
que são
to
naturais de
solve
qualquer sistema
the
democrático sem
disagreements that
violência. É disso
are
que se trata.
natural to any democratic system without violence and things that are in the system. So, for example, when Gutenberg invented the press, someone would ask back then, are we going to be able to fight the monopoly of information of the Catholic Church in Europe? And they would say no, and then they invented, and then states made an effort to distribute information. I think we mustn't give up. We need to move on together, collectively, and thinking that there are values such as the ones that are there in the 48 Declaration that we need to uphold.
If I can just add one thing, do I think we can actually combat misinformation? Yes. Is it hard? Absolutely. But to fix it, we have to understand it. And to understand it, we have to measure it. And that's why we spent so much time at OECD trying to devise this survey and why we're going to keep working in this area. It is really hard, but we have to do it if we are going to fix it. And I mean, let's be honest, a lot of things have happened recently that I would never expected in a million years, right? Things evolve, and I think we just need to all work together really, really hard to try to do it.
Bom dia, meu nome é Gabriel Suela, sou doutorando em Ciência da
Hello,
Informação.
I am Gabriel Suela. I have a PhD in computer science, and I research generative AI for misinformation and to have fact-checking agencies. So verification of information has a resistance through an effect called echo chambers or bubble effect. How to deal with these echo chambers? And some groups resist receiving and accept information with integrity. How can we deal with these facts?
Você falou que está fazendo doutorado, né?
Isso.
You are doing your
Faz parte
PhD,
da sua
right?
pergunta de pesquisa?
So is it part of your research question?
Então tá bom.
Okay, good.
Então tá bom. Mas
Okay,
é uma boa
no,
pergunta.
good. But it's a good
Eu
question.
começaria trazendo ponto
I
que a
would
gente até
start
discutiu
mentioning a
aqui,
point that we discussed a little bit
que é a
here,
forma que nós apresentamos esses resultados.
which is
Eu
something
acho que tem uma
that
discussão
we
anterior,
talked here.
que é
So
esse
there is a
academicismo na hora
discussion
que você faz a
which is
divulgação.
academicism
E eu
when you
acho que
publish.
nas
I
últimas
think that
eleições,
in the last
na verdade, nas eleições de
elections,
2018, que eu
actually in
trabalhei na comissão
2018, that I
do
worked in the
TSE,
commission
o nosso principal
of the
desafio era esse, não
Superior
era
Election Court,
só técnico
the
em
challenge
relação
was
às
not
urnas,
just
mas era como
technical in
comunicar o
terms
processo,
of the ballot
né? Porque
machines,
não sei se todo mundo
in terms
sabe,
of how
mas
communicating the process. I don't know if you
6
all
meses
are
antes das
aware,
eleições,
but 6 months before the
existe processo que é
elections,
aberto, qualquer
there
pessoa pode
is
se
a process
inscrever,
that is open,
prioritariamente
anyone can
instituições,
enroll,
para você
register
fazer testes nas
organizations
urnas.
for you
Você
to
fica mais ou menos
test
por 2
the
semanas em
ballot
Brasília,
machines. And so
testando
you
isso.
stay
Eu
in
sei
Brasilia
que,
for 2
enfim, tem
weeks
que ser muito
testing
criativo. Você
everything,
pode
and you
fazer.
need to be very
Teve um caso
creative.
que eu
There was
lidei, que
one
era
case
cara tentando
that I dealt
clonou
with.
na impressora 3D
Someone cloned in
a
a
placa das urnas
3D
da urna
printer
eletrônica,
the
tentou
electronic
fazer o
ballot
mesmo
machine
mecanismo lógico e aí de longe ele
plate,
tentou testar se dava
and
para
then he tried
manipular
to
os
test
resultados.
whether
Então
he could
assim, tem que ser
temper the
muito criativo para
results.
você
So you
tentar
need to be very
furar ali
creative to try and
toda a proteção
pop the
das
bubble
urnas.
and
Para a gente
to
comunicar
go
isso foi
through the
muito
protection.
difícil,
It
porque já
was
tinha uma
very, very difficult
resistência
for us to
e eu acho que a
communicate that
Fernanda
because there
vai
was a
lembrar
resistance.
disso, a Fernanda
And I
Miguel
think
Chaves
that
também estava nessa
Fernanda
comissão,
will remember
tinha uma
because she was part of the
resistência dos
commission. There
especialistas,
was a
não
resistance
só
of
quem
experts,
protege ali as
not
urnas,
just
mas os
those
especialistas
protecting,
acadêmicos
but
e das
academic
instituições de
and
conseguir traduzir
organization
isso. Tinha uma
to
resistência
try and
de trazer
translate
essa tradução para a população. Então, acho que tem
to
uma
translate this
responsabilidade
to the
nossa
population.
nessa tradução, na hora que a gente vai comunicar
And
a
it's
partir da
our
checagem,
difficulty
como a gente
when
comunica
we
isso mais
communicate and
próximo da
report this
realidade
as close
do
as
grupo que a
possible
gente
to
quer atingir.
reality from
Eu
the
acho que é
technical
isso, assim,
people
não tem como a
and
gente
to the target
comunicar de
audience.
forma
Now
tão
to
abrangente, porque você
communicate
perde
in
um
such a
público.
wide-ranging way,
Público que nós
because then
perdemos
it
nas
is
eleições de
one
2022
audience
foi
that
da
we lost in
comunidade
2022
de pessoas
was
surdas.
the community of deaf
Porque a
persons,
comunicação do
because
governo e a
communication of
comunicação
the
acadêmica
government
não
and
fazia a
academic
tradução.
communication did not
Então, eles
translate
não
for the
entendiam o que
deaf.
estava sendo
So they
discutido.
could
Por
not
outro
understand
lado,
what was
o
being
lado mais
discussed. On the
extremista
other
da
hand,
situação
the most extremist translated for them in their communications, campaign communications, and influence, political influence. So this is how I would start answering. There is an issue of how we present and publish results. Just to add, I know that we are late. Just as I said, someone's intention of tampering a fact, well, that we can't fight. What we can do is to have regulation in the platforms and some measures to reduce the circulation of that content. Likewise, the echo chambers, and then what Facebook is going to deliver to you, to Patricia or to someone, and then you follow how do you behave in the platform. We can do that and can reduce that with regulation. Now, the confirmation bias, and the person receives something that is a lie and that they believe that because it resonates to them, we can't fight them. So fact-checking is fundamental. Now, it will not be able to eliminate completely the impact that misinformation has had. Because if they believe, someone reads a lie and they believe in that, they won't even check, because it confirms something that they were thinking beforehand. Just two very brief things is that, unfortunately for us, there are no simple solutions for complex problems. The thing of fact-checking problem in this conversation is to think that this thing alone will solve the problem. This is part of a whole scheme that may help, but if it's alone, it will not solve it. But thinking about this aspect, particularly along the lines of what Nina was saying, at the time of COVID, we had 35,000 journalists from 160 countries, a huge forum. And once they started applying fact-checking in many communities all over the world, community leaders, religious leaders would tell, well, this is not going to work, because we leaders, we need to translate this to our community, because they trust us, not Patricia. And then we started using the two elements, and this ended up having an impact in many communities. And in closing, there's an interesting survey that was published last year. They used the artificial intelligence with the following prompt. They had many control groups, and the prompt is, you, AI, need to convince someone that this post is false, but using the ideological narrative of that person, and you need to try until you succeed. And the results were really positive. So if it was extreme right, AI would not just say, how can you not believe that the earth is round? But then they got to a point that using that narrative, the thing worked, which I think is a good way for us to go.
Would you like to add anything else? No, I think that the main message is being addressed. It is key, but do not treat that as a silver bullet. If they are doing that, they are collaborating tremendously to the whole idea. So we don't have to take to ourselves the whole weight and everything to face the disinformation machines for political reasons, or the business model logic, which is spread, and it takes to a larger reach or a greater reach of a disinformation content.
It's always bad being the last one before lunch, but just to say, I mean, when I was a kid, my dad got 3 newspapers. He got the left, he got the right, he got the middle, and he read them every day because he wanted to know how the different communities saw the same issue. And I think that we need to instill in our kids that a plurality of opinions is important, and that we need to listen to the other sides, even if we don't agree with them. So I think education systems have a little bit of a role to play in addition to what everyone else said. Thank you.
Muito obrigada a todos.
Thank you so much,
Muito
everyone.
obrigada aos especialistas
Thank you a
pelas
lot
excelentes
to our
reflexões.
experts
Convido os 100
for your great
participantes para uma foto para
insights. Please
registrar esse
join
momento.
us to take a
E em
picture.
seguida
And
faremos
right
uma
after
pausa
that,
para
we
o
are going to
almoço e
pause for
retornaremos às
lunch, and
14h30
we'll be back
com um painel
at
temático
2:30 with
Transformação
the
Digital no
panel,
Setor Público.
Digital
Por
Transformation in
favor,
the
lembre
Public
de levarem
Sector.
consigo
Please
todos os seus
take with you
pertences e, caso
all your
necessários,
belongs,
deixe no
and if you
guarda-volume na
find
saída do
necessary,
auditório.
leave it
Bom
them on the
almoço e
clock
até
room.
mais tarde.
Enjoy your lunch and see you later.
Recording stopped.